She had memorized his coffee order. She knew the exact way he folded his sleeves when he was nervous. She knew which nights his daughter had nightmares and which songs he hummed when he thought no one was listening, and she had never once told him any of it. For 6 years, Ryan Brooks told himself that what he felt was friendship, that the way his chest tightened every time Sophia Sterling laughed at something he said, that was just comfort, familiarity, safety. He was wrong, and today, in front of both their families, the truth was going to find them whether they were ready or not. If this story already has your heart, hit that like button and drop the name of your city in the comments. Let's see just how far this story travels. The morning started the way most of Ryan Brooks's mornings did, with something going slightly wrong. He'd set his alarm for 7. He woke up at 6:43 because Maya, his 5-year-old, had crawled into his bed at some point in the night and was now sleeping diagonally across his chest with one small foot pressed firmly against his jaw. He lay there for a few minutes, staring at the ceiling, trying to figure out if he could slide out from under her without waking her up. He couldn't. He never could. Maya. He nudged her gently. Hey, Bug, I gotta get up. She didn't stir. She made a small sound, the kind that sat somewhere between a grunt and a whine, and pulled the blanket tighter around herself like she was making a point. Ryan exhaled through his nose. He had to be at the Sterling's place by 9 to help set up. Sophia had texted him the night before, twice, reminding him not to be late, as if he'd ever been late to anything involving her family, as if she didn't know that he showed up to those things earlier than he showed up to his own obligations. He managed to ease himself out of bed without fully waking Maya, which felt like a minor victory. He stood in the doorway of his bedroom for a second and looked back at her, the way she'd somehow taken over the entire queen-sized mattress, dark curls fanned out on the pillow, one arm draped over the edge. She looked exactly like her mother used to sleep. That thought landed the way it always did. Not sharply anymore, but with a familiar, dull weight that he'd learned to carry without letting it slow him down. He got dressed in the dark. Jeans, a faded gray Henley, the old canvas jacket that had been washed so many times the color had softened into something that wasn't quite any specific shade. Sophia had told him 3 times this year to throw that jacket out. He kept wearing it. The drive to her parents' house took 22 minutes from his apartment on the east side of the city. He knew the route without thinking. He'd driven it so many times over the past 6 years that his hands found the turns before his brain registered them. Right on Kellerman, left at the light past the pharmacy, through the neighborhood where the old oak trees had grown tall enough to arch over the road and make it feel, in certain light, like driving through a tunnel. The Sterling house was a large craftsman-style home at the end of a cul-de-sac. Warm wood tones, a wide front porch, flower beds that Sophia's mother, Carol, kept immaculate, and Sophia's father, Douglas, took credit for at every family dinner. It was the kind of house that felt lived in the best possible way. Scuffed floorboards and mismatched throw pillows, and a kitchen that smelled permanently of coffee and whatever Carol had started cooking before anyone else was awake. Ryan had felt at home here since the first time Sophia brought him over, which was almost exactly 6 years ago. He'd met Sophia at a mutual friend's going-away party. They'd ended up on the back porch arguing about whether a particular film was actually as good as everyone said it was. He thought she was stubborn and a little too confident. She told him later she'd thought he was the kind of man who confused being blunt with being smart. They'd exchanged numbers anyway because neither of them had been able to figure out who was right, and the argument felt unfinished. The argument was still technically unfinished. He parked at the curb and grabbed the 2 grocery bags from his back seat. He'd stopped on the way and picked up the extra table napkins Carol had texted him about, because Sophia had forgotten them on her supply run the day before, which Sophia did not know yet, and which Ryan was planning to mention casually and with great timing. Carol met him at the front door before he'd even knocked. She was a compact woman in her early 60s, silver-streaked hair pulled back, already in an apron, a glass of iced water in one hand, and a look on her face that suggested she'd been managing a minor emergency since 6 a.m. Ryan. She said his name like a sigh of relief. You brought the napkins. You texted me at 11 last night. I texted Sophia first. She stepped aside to let him in. She texted back that she'd handle it. I should have texted you first. You should have. Carol patted his arm as he came through the door. Don't tell her I said that. I won't. He paused. Right away. She gave him a look, the kind that was equal parts fond and exasperated, and pointed him toward the kitchen. The house was already in that particular state of pre-party organized chaos. Folding tables stacked against the dining room wall, flower arrangements in various stages of assembly on the kitchen counter, a folded tablecloth sitting on a chair where it had apparently been forgotten. Douglas Sterling was in the backyard setting up chairs with Sophia's younger brother Marcus, who was 27 and had recently gotten engaged and was therefore in the specific position of being the family's second most talked about person at any gathering. Sophia's grandmother was seated in the living room with a cup of tea and a look of pure observation, watching everything unfold with the patience of someone who had attended enough family events to know that chaos resolved itself eventually. Ryan set the grocery bags on the counter and started unloading them. "She's upstairs," Carol said, appearing beside him to pull out the napkins. "She got here at 7:30. She's been reorganizing the backyard layout twice." "Of course she has." "She moved the dessert table 3 times. That tracks." "She's going to say the second placement was always the plan." "It will have been," Ryan said. "In her version." Carol smiled at him the way she did sometimes. Not quite saying something, just looking at him with an expression he'd never been able to fully decode, like she was waiting for him to figure something out on his own. "Go find her," Carol said. "She's been asking where you are since 8. He found Sophia in the backyard, standing beside the relocated dessert table and studying it with the expression of someone who was not yet convinced they'd made the right decision. She had her hair pulled back and was wearing a light blouse tucked into high-waisted slacks. Practical for setup work, but still entirely put together, because Sophia didn't do halfway when it came to how she presented herself, even to family. There was a clipboard under her arm that she absolutely did not need, but always had at events. She heard him coming across the grass and turned around. "You're late," she said. "It's 8:58. "I said 9. 9 is when I arrive. It's 8:58. I am 2 minutes early." She gave him the look, the particular narrowing of her eyes that meant she knew he was technically correct and found it annoying. "You brought the napkins?" "Already in the kitchen." Something shifted slightly in her expression. "Good. I was about to go get them. Carol told me you forgot them yesterday." "I didn't forget them. I made a strategic decision to delegate. To no one. To the universe. The universe delivered." She turned back to the dessert table and adjusted one of the small decorative cards. "The dessert table looks better here." "It looks the same as it did in the other spot." "It catches better light here." He looked up at the sky. It was overcast. There was no significant difference in the light anywhere in the backyard. He said nothing. "Don't," she said without turning around. "I didn't say anything." "You were about to." "I really wasn't." She finally turned and looked at him fully. A quick scan, the way she looked at him sometimes when she was making sure he was actually okay and was too stubborn to ask directly. He'd noticed that habit of hers about 3 years into their friendship and had never mentioned it because naming it felt like it might make her stop. "You look tired," she said. Maya was sideways across my chest most of the night, the corner of her mouth pulled up. "Did she win?" "She always wins. She's 5 and she has no concept of fairness." "You need a bigger bed." "I need a 5-year-old with spatial awareness." "Those don't exist." She finally smiled properly, not the polished smile she used in professional settings, but the real one, slightly unguarded, with the small dimple on her left side that she was self-conscious about for reasons he'd never understood. "Come help me with the chairs. Marcus keeps lining them up wrong, and my dad thinks they look fine." "They probably look fine. They're not straight." "Nobody's going to look at the chair alignment, Sophia." "I will." He followed her across the yard because that was what he did. That was what they did. The graduation party was for Sophia's cousin, Danielle, 22 years old, just finished her master's degree in environmental science, the first in that side of the family to reach a graduate degree. It was a bigger deal than the word party made it sound. There were people coming from out of town. Carol had been cooking for 2 days. Douglas had bought a new outdoor speaker system that he'd spent the better part of the previous weekend figuring out how to connect. By 11, the house was filling up. Relatives came through in waves, cousins, aunts, old family friends who remembered Sophia and Marcus as children and made comments about how grown they were now, which Sophia accepted with a gracious smile, and Marcus accepted by suddenly becoming fascinated with whatever was on the food table. Ryan navigated it all in the way he always did at Sterling family gatherings. He knew enough people by now that it didn't feel like being a guest, but he was also aware that there was a version of himself here that was slightly different from his regular self. More at ease somehow, less guarded. He'd noticed it before, dear, that the act of being in this house, around these people, had a specific effect on him that he couldn't quite explain and had long since stopped trying to. He helped Marcus wrestle the large folding table into the right position when Douglas's configuration turned out to be 3 inches off from the tent cover. He carried extra folding chairs from the garage when it became clear the original head count had been underestimated. He refilled the ice in the drink coolers twice. He found Sophia's grandmother's reading glasses, which had been left on the porch railing, and brought them back to her in the living room, and she called him a good boy and offered him a hard candy from her purse, which he accepted because you didn't turn down a candy from Eleanor Sterling. "You've been here before?" an older woman asked him, a great aunt visiting from out of state, someone he didn't recognize. She was watching him move through the kitchen with the ease of someone who knew where things were. 6 years, he said. She studied him. "You're the son-in-law?" "Friend," he said. "Just a friend." She made a sound that was technically not disagreement, but wasn't agreement either, and went back to her conversation. By noon, the party was fully underway. Danielle arrived and was immediately absorbed by a receiving line of relatives that stretched most of the length of the backyard. Music came from the speaker system at a volume Douglas had selected, and Sophia had already turned down once. Food was out, and Carol was making the rounds with the expression of someone who had made enough food for twice this number of people and was going to see it all eaten. Ryan was at the drink table, refilling his own glass, when Sophia appeared beside him and reached past him for the lemonade. "Stop doing the ice thing," she said. "The ice thing. You keep reorganizing the ice bucket so the cubes are distributed evenly around the edge. People have noticed. They won't run out on one side now. It's an ice bucket, Ryan, not a civil engineering project. Ice distribution is important at outdoor events and stop." She said it without heat, the way she said most things to him. Direct, slightly impatient on the surface, something warmer underneath. She poured her lemonade. "How are you? You've been moving since you got here." "That's what setup is. Setup is done. You can stop." "There's still, Ryan." She turned and looked at him, just looked for a second, in the straightforward way she had of looking at him that had always made him feel like she was seeing something more specific than he was comfortable with. "Stop." He stopped. "Drink your drink," she said. "Danielle's about to do her speech thing. You don't want to miss it." "Is it going to be long?" "She has a PowerPoint." He looked at her. "I know," Sophia said. "I know." Danielle's speech was 11 minutes long and did include briefly a PowerPoint on her phone, projected through sheer narrative commitment rather than an actual projector. It was earnest and funny, and the moment she started crying halfway through, the whole backyard went quiet in that specific way that family gatherings did when someone said something true. Ryan watched Sophia through most of it. She was standing across the yard beside her mother, one arm loosely around Carol's shoulders, smiling at her cousin. She didn't know he was watching. That was the only reason he let himself do it. This was the thing about Sophia Sterling that nobody who only knew her professionally would understand. She had built an empire from the ground up by the time she was 28, a luxury property development company that had expanded into 3 cities and was regularly featured in business publications that described her with words like visionary and formidable. She sat in boardrooms and made decisions that moved millions of dollars. She was precise and composed and entirely controlled in professional settings. But here, in her parents' backyard, watching her cousin cry through a graduation speech, she was just Sophia, the one who argued with him about movies, the one who texted him at 11 p.m. about napkins, the one who moved the dessert table 3 times and pretended it had only ever been in one position. He had known both versions of her for 6 years, and he had loved both of them for longer than he was willing to calculate. Not that he would use that word. Not out loud. Not even to himself, most days. What? The afternoon stretched out in the warm, unhurried way of family gatherings where nobody is watching the clock. Children ran across the grass. The older relatives migrated toward the shaded porch. Marcus somehow ended up teaching a group of cousins a card game he claimed to have invented, which was clearly just a version of an existing game with 2 rules changed. Ryan helped carry out the dessert trays when Carol signaled from the back door. He and Sophia arranged them on the table she had relocated twice. "You were right about the light," he said. "I told you. It's still overcast. The overcast light is better here." He didn't argue. He stood beside her and looked at the dessert table and felt, for a moment, the specific contentment of being exactly where he was supposed to be, doing something entirely unremarkable, beside someone whose presence had become so embedded in the structure of his daily life that he genuinely couldn't map a version of himself that didn't include her. He didn't examine that feeling. He'd gotten practiced at not examining it. It happened while the cake was being cut. Carol was standing near the edge of the group, close enough to a small cluster of relatives, 2 aunts and a neighbor, that her voice carried farther than she probably intended. Ryan was beside Douglas, holding 2 paper plates, waiting for the cake to be sliced. Sophia was on the other side of the table, helping Danielle with the first cut. He heard Carol before he understood what she was saying. "Always asking me if he's eaten, if he's sleeping. I told her he's a grown man, but she looks at me like I've said something ridiculous." Ryan's attention sharpened slightly, the way it did when something at the edge of your awareness suddenly became relevant, though he wasn't sure why yet. "She knows his coffee order by heart," Carol continued. She had the tone of someone who found this both charming and faintly exasperating. "She knows what he takes in it, in the afternoon versus the morning. She notices when he's worn the same jacket 3 days in a row. I said to Douglas, this is not friendship behavior." The aunt said something Ryan couldn't catch. The neighbor laughed. "And the way she talks about his daughter. Maya this, Maya that. She tells me things Ryan says to that little girl at bedtime. Bedtime routines. How does she know bedtime routines?" Ryan had gone very still. He became aware, in the way you became aware of a room temperature change, that a few people nearby had registered the conversation. Not everyone. But the 2 cousins to his left had glanced over. Marcus, who was nearby, had also gone quiet. He looked across the dessert table. Sophia had heard it. He could tell the exact moment it landed. Her hand stilled on the cake knife, and something in her face changed. Not dramatically, not in any way that most people would have caught. But he knew her face. He had spent 6 years learning her face without meaning to. The way you learn things about a person without studying them, just by being present over and over until the knowledge was simply in you. She looked up from the table and met his eyes. It was a fraction of a second, half a breath, and then she looked away. Carol had turned slightly and noticed the people nearby and seemed to register, a beat too late, what she'd been saying and how loudly. She didn't look mortified. Carol Sterling was not a woman who mortified easily. But she shifted topics with the practiced ease of someone changing conversational lanes. But the moment had already happened. Danielle, to her credit, clapped her hands and announced that cake was being served, which successfully pulled most of the nearby attention toward dessert. Plates were passed. The conversation diffused back into the warm, slightly louder noise of a party in full swing. Ryan set his plate down without taking cake. He looked across the yard and found the spot where Sophia had been standing. She wasn't there anymore. He scanned the backyard, the clusters of relatives, the chairs, the relocated dessert table. He turned toward the house. The back door was still swinging slightly, settling from where it had just been pushed open. Marcus appeared beside him. For once, he didn't say anything. He just looked at the house, then back at Ryan, and raised his eyebrows in the specific way that meant, "You should probably go deal with that." Ryan thought about standing still. He thought about picking up his plate and eating cake and letting the moment settle the way moments sometimes did, quietly, beneath the noise of everything else, until they could pretend it hadn't happened. Then he looked at the back door. He put his plate on the table and walked toward the house. The kitchen was empty. A few relatives were in the living room, but they paid him no attention. He moved down the hallway, past the framed photos on the wall. Sophia at 7 with a missing front tooth, Marcus at 4 in a Halloween costume, Douglas and Carol at what looked like their 25th anniversary dinner. He checked the small sitting room. Empty. He was turning to check the stairs when he heard it, a small, sharp sound. Not distress exactly, more like the sound of someone exhaling too hard, trying to reset. It was coming from behind the laundry room door. He stood there for a second. He knocked twice, not loud, just enough. No answer. He pushed the door open. Sophia was sitting on the edge of the washing machine, not dramatically, not crying, not visibly falling apart. She was just sitting there with her arms crossed and her jaw set and her eyes fixed on a point on the opposite wall, which was how Sophia Sterling looked when she was dealing with something she hadn't prepared for and deeply resented not having prepared for. She looked at him when he came in. "Close the door," she said. He closed the door. The laundry room was small and warm and smelled like fabric softener. There was a basket of unfolded towels on the floor that Carol had clearly been working through before the party swallowed the morning. The dryer had a post-it note on it that said, "Delicates. Do not tumble," in Douglas's handwriting. Ryan leaned against the closed door and looked at her. "I'm fine," Sophia said. "You're sitting in the laundry room." "I needed a minute." "Okay." People were staring. A few people. "My mother—" She stopped. Started again. She didn't mean anything by it. She was just talking. She talks. She does. She wasn't saying... Another stop. The jaw tightened. She was exaggerating. That's what she does. She turns things into stories. Ryan didn't say anything. He stood where he was and let her talk. "I know his coffee order because I'm observant," Sophia said. "That's just... I pay attention to people. That's a personality trait. It doesn't mean anything?" "Okay." "And the jacket thing. The jacket is objectively a problem. Any reasonable person would notice that jacket." "The jacket's been a problem for 2 years." "Exactly." She pointed at him like he'd made her point for her. "It's practical concern. It's..." She stopped. She dropped her hand. The composure she'd been holding shifted slightly. Not collapsed, but changed. Like something behind her expression had gotten tired. "Ryan," she said, and his name sounded different when she said it that way. Quieter and more worn, like she'd been carrying it somewhere she wasn't supposed to. He waited. She looked at him. Really looked at him. Not the way she did when she was cataloging how tired he was, or assessing whether he'd remembered to eat. This was a different kind of looking, direct and unguarded and a little bit scared, and Sophia Sterling was almost never scared of anything. "How much of that did people hear?" she asked. "Some of it." "How much is some?" "Enough," he said honestly. She made a sound in her throat, looked back at the opposite wall. "I should go back out," she said. "This is Danielle's day. I shouldn't be in here." "You should take a minute." "I've taken a minute." "Sophia." She didn't move. Ryan pushed off the door and crossed the small space between them. Not close, just closer. He sat down on the dryer beside the washing machine, which put them at roughly the same height, and he looked at her profile and thought about all the things he'd been not thinking for 6 years, and felt something in the back of his chest pull. "What did you want to say?" he asked, quietly, without pressure. She shook her head. "Come on," he said. "Don't." Her voice had an edge, not anger, more like warning, or maybe plea. "Don't do that thing you do where you make it easier to say things." "What thing?" "You know what thing." She finally turned her head and looked at him directly, and there it was. That look, stripped of its usual control, and under it something he recognized because he'd been carrying the same thing and pretending it was something smaller. That thing where you're calm and you ask the right question and then suddenly I've told you things I wasn't planning to tell anyone. "You don't have to tell me anything," he said. "But you're going to sit there. I'm going to sit here. And be calm. Probably." She looked at him for another moment. Then she let out a breath that wasn't quite a laugh, but wasn't entirely not one either, and turned back to the wall and said nothing. From outside, through the door, they could hear the muffled sound of the party. The music, the voices, the occasional burst of laughter. The world continuing in the way it did. indifferent to two people in a laundry room sitting with years of unfinished business between them. Sophia reached up and pulled the elastic from her hair, let it fall around her shoulders. That was always the tell. When she undid her hair, she'd stopped performing composure and was just being inside herself for a minute. "I knew his daughter before she could talk," she said. "Not to him exactly. More like to the room. I was there when he brought her home from the hospital. I held her for 3 hours while he tried to figure out how to work the baby monitor." Ryan didn't move. "I know he takes his morning coffee with a splash of oat milk and nothing else. And in the afternoon he adds sugar because his energy's dropped and he won't admit it. I know he hums the same 3 songs when he's distracted and doesn't realize he's doing it. I know when he's about to say something he doesn't mean because his left eyebrow goes slightly higher than the right." She paused. "I know that he still wears that jacket because it was what he had on the day Maya was born, and he hasn't told anyone that, but he hasn't gotten rid of it, and he won't." Ryan's chest went very quiet. "I know all of that," Sophia said, "and I've known all of it for a long time." Her voice didn't waver, but it was softer now, in the way things got when you were done protecting them. "And I called it friendship. I called it being a good friend, paying attention." She finally looked at him again. "Because that was safer. Because if it was just friendship, I couldn't lose it." The laundry room was very still. Ryan looked at her. The woman who had argued with him on a back porch about a film 6 years ago and never stopped arguing with him about something, who had shown up with a casserole the week after Maya came home without being asked, who had texted him at 11 p.m. about napkins and had reorganized the party 3 times because she needed everything to be right for the people she loved, who had built an empire from nothing and could sit across from a boardroom full of suits without blinking, but was currently sitting on her parents' washing machine with her hair down, telling him truths she'd been folding smaller and smaller for years. He had a lot of things he could have said. He had practiced, in the unacknowledged way people practice things they pretended they weren't preparing for, the shape of this conversation, the words he might use if he were ever in a version of this moment. None of them felt right. So he said the first true thing. "I know that jacket," he said. "I know exactly why you haven't made me throw it out." She went very still. "Because you were there," he said. "You drove me to the hospital. You held her first because I was shaking too hard. And you never told me that you remember it the same way I do." Sophia's eyes dropped for a second. "I've called this friendship," Ryan said, "because I didn't have a word for what it actually was that didn't terrify me." His voice was even, not because he was calm, but because he had gotten to the other side of the fear and found that what was there was just the truth. And the truth was simpler than the fear had been. "And because I was afraid that if I named it, you'd look at me differently, and you're the person I can't afford to lose." She looked back up at him. "Ryan, I'm not asking you for anything," he said. My mother always told me things I left unsaid had a way of making themselves heard anyway, usually at the worst time." The corner of his mouth moved. "Apparently she was right." Sophia let out a breath that caught slightly in the middle. "Your mother also told you that you should throw that jacket out," she said. "She did. She wasn't wrong either. She was about the jacket." A silence settled between them. Not uncomfortable, not urgent, just present, the way a truth was present after you stopped hiding it, taking up its actual amount of space. Outside, someone laughed, a big, rolling laugh that carried through the door. A child shrieked the way children did when they were running and delighted and wanted everyone to know it. The music continued at the volume Douglas had reset it to when he thought no one was watching. Sophia sat on the washing machine with her hair down and looked at Ryan Brooks. This man she had driven to a hospital, helped move apartments, argued with over films, called at 2 a.m., when contracts fell apart, brought casseroles to, pretended she wasn't watching fall in love with his own daughter, and did not look away. "We should go back out," she said. "In a minute," he said. She didn't argue. They sat in the quiet of the laundry room while the party continued without them. 2 people who had spent 6 years being careful, finally in the same room with the thing they'd been careful about. Neither of them moved toward the door. Not yet. Part 2. Louis. Viet sao nghiên đến sao nghiên năm trăm từ liên kết liên mạch với các phần trước trong câu chuyện, pha hồi thoại tạo thành một câu chuyện liền mạch khi ghép lại. Mỗi phần liền mạch với phần trước, không giới thiệu lại câu chuyện ở đầu phần mới. Liên kết các phần của câu chuyện một cách liền mạch, sử dụng câu chuyện tiếp giữa các phần. Duy trì chủ đề, tránh ngắt quãng đột ngột, không sử dụng gạch đầu dòng hoặc tiêu đề phụ. Phong cách kể chuyện Mỹ, Hoa Kỳ, giống văn giàu cảm xúc. Kể theo ngôi thứ 3, giữ đồ kịch tính không viết lan man, nhân vật không hoàn hảo, hội thoại tự nhiên, tránh ngôn ngữ văn chương sáo rơi và cụm từ AI điển hình. Viết như nhà văn chuyên nghiệp, không như AI cố gắng nghe sang. Có yếu tố con người, cấm miêu tả qua mượt mà và hoàn hảo, kết thúc phần không giới thiệu phần sau, câu chuyện không nhắc đến Chúa. Lưu ý trả lời trong mục tin nhắn không nhảy sang document, chỉ dần bắt buộc, không được xuất hiện trong nội dung truyền. Đây là một câu chuyện điện ảnh hoàn toàn hư cấu được tạo ra chỉ nhằm mục đích giải trí. Không đề cập hay ngụ ý rằng nó dựa trên sự kiện có thật, người thật hoặc câu chuyện có thật. Không sử dụng các cụm từ như dựa trên một câu chuyện có thật, theo ghi chép hoặc bất cứ điều gì tương tự. Tất cả các nhân vật, địa điểm, tổ chức và sự kiện phải hoàn toàn hư cấu. Show more 14 giờ 56 phút Part 2. The minute stretched. Neither of them acknowledged its stretching. That was the thing about being in a small room with a truth you'd just put down on the floor between you. There was a period where neither person quite knew what to do with their hands or their eyes or the next sentence. So they stayed where they were, Ryan on the dryer and Sophia on the washing machine with the muffled noise of the party pressing softly against the door, and neither of them made a move toward it. It was Sophia who finally spoke. "You hummed today," she said, twice. Once when you were doing the chairs with Marcus, and once when you were reorganizing the ice. Ryan looked at her. "The second one," she said. "That was the one you do when you're thinking about something else. The distracted one." She wasn't looking at him directly. She was looking at her hands, which were folded in her lap. "I notice when you do that. I notice which one it is." "Which song was it?" She told him. He hadn't realized he'd been doing it. She finally looked up at him with an expression that was part rueful and part exhausted. The expression of someone who had been holding a very specific kind of careful for a very long time and was now feeling the weight of having set it down. "I have been noticing things about you for 6 years, Ryan. I notice all of it. I notice it, and I file it away, and I tell myself it's just because we're close. That's what close friends do." "It is what close friends do," he said. "Not like this." She shook her head once, small. "Not the way I do it." The dryer hummed faintly beneath him. Outside, a child laughed, high and sharp and delighted. And then the sound dissolved back into the general noise of the party. Ryan looked at his hands, then he looked at her. "So what do we do?" he asked. Sophia looked at him like it was the wrong question, or maybe the right question asked a beat too early. She pressed her lips together, thinking, the way she did when she was working out a problem that didn't have a clean solution, and he knew that expression. He'd seen it across boardroom tables when she described a deal that had gone sideways, and across his kitchen table when Maya had a fever at 2 a.m., and they were trying to figure out whether it was high enough to call the doctor. "We go back out there," she said. "That's not an answer." "It's the answer for right now." She slid off the washing machine and smoothed the front of her blouse, a gesture he recognized as the one she made when she was reassembling herself. "Danielle's party is not the place for—" She gestured between them. "This. I know. This needs—" She stopped, tried again. "I need to think. I'm not someone who does well with not thinking first. I know that too." She looked at him sharply, the way she did when she was trying to figure out whether he was being sincere or gently teasing, which were things that often sounded the same coming from him. "I mean it," he said. "Take the time you need." Something in her shoulders dropped a fraction. Not relief exactly, but something adjacent to it. She reached up and pulled her hair back into its elastic, smoothing it into place, and he watched her do it and felt the familiar ache of watching her build herself back up for public consumption. The way she did it so automatically, the way she'd probably been doing it for years. "Don't look at me like that," she said, without looking at him. "Like what?" "Like you feel sorry for me." "I don't feel sorry for you." She finished with her hair and turned to the door. Her hand rested on the knob and she paused, not quite looking back. Are we okay? She asked. We're okay, he said. She nodded once, like that was the confirmation she needed to step back into the afternoon. She opened the door and walked out. Ryan stayed on the dryer for another 30 seconds. He stared at the post-it note on the washing machine door. Delicates, do not tumble. And thought that this was, in its way, the most honest conversation he'd had in years. He thought about the 6 years behind them, laid out like a road he'd been walking without realizing he was on it. He thought about the first time he'd brought Maya to this house, and how Sophia had held her without being asked, and how he'd watched that and felt something shift in the center of himself that he had spent 6 years carefully not naming. He got up and went back to the party. The afternoon had the particular quality of time passing slowly while also moving forward without you. Ryan moved through it like he always did, present, functional, useful. But a layer of himself was somewhere else, sitting in that laundry room, replaying the sound of Sophia's voice saying not like this with the specific exhaustion of someone being honest about something they'd been dishonest about for too long. He refilled the drink coolers a third time. He helped Carol with the leftovers. He played 3 rounds of Marcus's invented card game, which he lost deliberately twice and won the third time because Marcus had started getting smug about it. He did not look at Sophia more than he normally would. At least, he tried. The problem was that Sophia was everywhere. She was the person who had organized this event, who knew where everything was, who Carol leaned over to ask about more napkins, and who Danielle pulled aside for a photo, and who Douglas teased about the speaker volume. She was woven into the fabric of the afternoon in a way that made not looking a nearly impossible task. And there was now a version of the day that was running parallel to the regular party. The version where Ryan was aware, in a way he hadn't previously allowed himself to be aware, of exactly where she was at all times. She was aware of him too. He could feel it in the way you felt a person's attention from across a room. Not intrusive, not obvious, just present. A second consciousness overlapping briefly with his own whenever they ended up on the same side of the yard. They didn't speak directly for almost an hour after the laundry room. It was Marcus who broke the surface. He appeared beside Ryan at the edge of the yard, holding a beer he'd been nursing since noon, and stood there for a moment with the studied casualness of a man who was absolutely about to say something. "So," Marcus said. "Don't," Ryan said. "I didn't say anything." "You were going to." "I was going to ask if you want another drink." Ryan looked at him. Marcus's expression was perfectly even. He was 27 and engaged, and the kind of person who was genuinely good at seeming relaxed while actually paying very close attention to things. Ryan had always liked Marcus. He also knew from 6 years of observation that Marcus Sterling missed very little. "My mom didn't mean to do that," Marcus said. "I know. She's been—" He paused, choosing his words. "She's been watching the two of you for a long time. She talks to me about it sometimes." "Marcus, I'm just saying." It's not like what she said was a surprise to anyone who was paying attention. Ryan looked out at the yard. Danielle was taking photos with a group of cousins near the back fence. Douglas was demonstrating something on his phone to the great-aunt who had asked Ryan earlier if he was the son-in-law. Carol was moving between the food table and the kitchen with the efficiency of someone who had been hosting gatherings for 40 years. Sophia was near the dessert table talking to a woman Ryan didn't recognize, a colleague of Danielle's maybe, or a family friend. She was composed and pleasant and managing the conversation the way she managed most conversations, which was with a kind of warm competence that made the other person feel held. She had her professional smile on, the good one. Ryan knew what was underneath it. "Is she okay?" Marcus asked, more quietly. "She'll be fine." "That wasn't what I asked." Ryan exhaled. "She's embarrassed." "She shouldn't be. You know how she is." Marcus nodded slowly. He did know how she was. "She's been a lot better in the last couple of years," he said. "Since—" He stopped himself. "Since what?" Marcus turned his beer in his hand. He had the look of someone deciding how much to say. "Since she stopped dating Daniel," he said finally. "You remember that?" Ryan remembered. Daniel Voss, a property developer Sophia had dated for about 8 months 2 years ago. Ryan had met him 3 times and had no specific reason to dislike him, which he had found, at the time, slightly confusing. The relationship had ended, and Sophia hadn't given him many details beyond a brief, clipped version that told him she was done talking about it. "What about him?" Ryan asked. Marcus looked at him with an expression that suggested he was about to say something Ryan was going to find uncomfortable. "She ended it because she said being with him made her feel like she was settling," Marcus said. "She didn't say settling for what. She didn't have to." He let the silence sit for exactly long enough. "My mom asked her about it once. She said she was done trying to be satisfied with almost." Ryan didn't say anything. "I'm not telling you what to do," Marcus said. "I'm just telling you what I know." He finished his beer. "Also, you should probably know that my grandmother has been telling people you're the son-in-law since about noon. So, for context." He walked back toward the house before Ryan could respond. Shit. The party began winding down around 4:30. The out-of-town relatives made their goodbyes in the long, drawn-out way that families did when they wouldn't see each other for another year. Extra hugs, promises of phone calls, a final round of photos by the front door. Danielle was glowing in the way people glow when they feel genuinely celebrated. Carol was already beginning to dismantle things with the quiet efficiency of a woman who had cleaned up after enough parties to do it in her sleep. Ryan stayed to help. He always stayed to help. That was a fact about him that had never required discussion. When there were chairs to fold and tables to carry and food to wrap and tuck into the refrigerator, Ryan Brooks was the person who was still there. It wasn't performance. It was just the kind of man he was. His grandmother had instilled it in him young, and it had stuck. Sophia was also still there, also helping, also moving through the house, doing the things that needed doing without being asked, because that was also the kind of person she was. They ended up in the kitchen together, which was inevitable. Carol had gone outside to say goodbye to the last of the relatives. Douglas was managing the speaker system, which had developed a minor Bluetooth connectivity issue he was addressing with the specific frustrated focus of a man who was going to figure it out if it took the rest of the evening. Marcus had disappeared upstairs for reasons unknown. The kitchen was quiet by comparison. Late afternoon light came through the window above the sink, that particular pale gold light of a day that was running toward evening. Ryan was wrapping the remaining cake. Sophia was at the counter consolidating the leftover food into containers, working with the methodical focus she brought to physical tasks. They worked in silence for a few minutes. It was a comfortable silence. It had always been comfortable. That was one of the things about the two of them. But there was a current underneath it now that hadn't been there before noon. Not tension exactly, more like awareness. "Daniel Voss ended things because he said you were emotionally unavailable," Ryan said. He hadn't planned to say it. It came out the way truths occasionally did when you'd been holding them long enough and the guard dropped for a second. Sophia's hand stilled on the container she was sealing. "Where did you hear that?" she asked. "I didn't, I guess, just now." He looked at her. "Was I right?" She turned to face him, leaning back against the counter with her arms crossed. The expression on her face was complicated, a mixture of assessment and something that might have been admission. "He said I wasn't present," she said. "That even when I was with him, I seemed like I was somewhere else." "Were you?" She held his gaze for a beat longer than was comfortable. "That depends on how you define somewhere else." Ryan said nothing. "He was a good person," she said. "He wasn't the problem." "I know. You always suspected something was wrong with that relationship." "I didn't." "Ryan." Her voice was quiet and slightly tired and completely certain. "You asked me twice in the first month if I was actually happy or if I just thought I should be." He had. He remembered it now. The two conversations, both slightly sideways, both framed as general check-ins, which they both knew they hadn't been. "I said I was happy," she said. "You said you were content." She blinked. Those are the same thing." "They're not." She looked at him. He looked at her. The kitchen settled around them with its afternoon light and the distant sound of Douglas muttering at his phone. "No," she said finally. "They're not the same thing." She said it quietly, like she was confirming something she'd known for a long time but hadn't said directly. "They're not the same thing at all." Carol came back in through the back door, and the kitchen became the kitchen again, full of movement and tasks and the warmth of the end of a good day. She enlisted both of them in clearing the last of the outdoor furniture, and for the next 40 minutes they were in motion again, and the conversation tucked itself into a pocket of the afternoon and waited. By the time the yard was cleared and the kitchen was restored to something approaching its normal order, it was past 5:30. The light had gone that deeper gold that meant early evening. The house had settled back into its regular self, quieter, full of the comfortable exhaustion that came after a day well used. Sophia sat at the kitchen table with a glass of water. Ryan sat across from her. Carol was upstairs. Douglas had solved the Bluetooth situation and gone to join her, calling to them from the stairs that there was coffee if they wanted it, which neither of them had responded to but which they both appreciated. It was the first time they'd been still all day. "I want to say something," Sophia said. "Okay." She held the glass in both hands and looked at the table. She was choosing her words carefully, which was different from the laundry room. In the laundry room she had spoken from exhaustion, from the place where the careful ran out. This was deliberate. This was Sophia deciding, with intention, to continue. "I've been afraid," she said. "That's what it comes down to. I've been afraid of what would happen to the friendship if—" She paused. "If I was wrong about what you felt. If I said something and you looked at me like I'd misread everything. You didn't misread anything. I know that now. I knew it before, actually. I just needed it to not be my imagination." She finally looked up. "The things my mom said today, I have thought about how that would happen, if it ever happened. I have thought about being found out. And in every version I imagined, I wanted to disappear." Her mouth tightened. "Today, when it happened, I didn't want to disappear quite as much as I expected to." Ryan watched her. "Because you didn't look at me like I was ridiculous," she said. "You followed me inside. Of course I followed you inside. You didn't have to." "Sophia," his voice was very even, "I have been following you into rooms for 6 years. She looked at him with something in her expression that broke open slightly at the edges. Not crying, not even close, because that was not how Sophia Sterling was constructed, but something that was in the same territory, something that had been held tightly for a very long time and was deciding whether it was safe to loosen. "You're not afraid," she said. It was half question, half statement. "I'm terrified," he said. "I was terrified in the laundry room. I've been terrified since about 2 years in when I realized what I was actually feeling and spent 4 months convincing myself it was just—" He stopped. Exhaled. "Familiarity. That's what I called it. Familiarity. That's a nice word for it. It was the coward's word for it." She almost smiled. "Not quite, but almost. You're not a coward. I called this friendship for 4 years after I knew it wasn't. So did I." They sat with that for a moment, the symmetry of it, both of them having been afraid of the same thing in the same way at roughly the same time. "Maya asked me about you last week," Ryan said. Something shifted in Sophia's expression. "She asked if you were going to be at her school show in November." He looked at the table. "She said," and this is a direct quote from a 5-year-old, "she said she wanted you there because you always clap the loudest." Sophia's breath came out slightly uneven. "She's right," Ryan said. "You do." "She has to project more," Sophia said, and her voice was slightly rougher than it had been. "She gets quiet when she's nervous. She needs to know the back row can hear her." "So you clap to tell her you can hear her?" "I clap because she's doing her best and she's 5 and she's incredible." He looked at her. She looked back. The kitchen held them both in that particular suspended moment that happened sometimes between people who had said too much to pretend they hadn't, and not yet enough to know what came next. "She's going to want to know," Ryan said. "Eventually. What's happening? She notices things." "I know." Sophia was quiet. "She gets that from you. She gets it from being around you." Another silence. Outside the window, the street was going golden. "I don't want to rush anything," Sophia said. "I need to—" She shook her head. "I'm not good at things I haven't thought through. You know that about me. I need to actually process this and not just fall into it because today was a strange day and my mother said something she shouldn't have, and suddenly everything was—" She gestured loosely. "Out loud." "I know," he said. "I'm not asking you to rush." "I need it to be real," she said. Whatever this is, however it goes, I need it to not be a reaction. I don't want to look back and wonder if we did it right. We can do it right. I want to. Then we will. She looked at him for a long moment, like she was checking the honesty of it, measuring it against everything she knew about him. And she knew a lot. That was the thing about loving someone who had been watching you for 6 years. They had data. They had the whole file. There was no performance possible when someone had seen you at 2 a.m. with a sick child and a broken coffee maker and a week's worth of second-guessing yourself. Whatever she measured, she seemed to find it holding. Okay, she said. Okay, he said. Carol came back downstairs and heated up the coffee, and the evening softened into something easier. The four of them, Carol, Douglas, Ryan, and Sophia, ended up at the kitchen table with coffee and leftover cake, and Douglas started a story about the speaker system that was funnier than it had any right to be, and Carol added details he'd left out, and Marcus appeared from upstairs at some point and ate a piece of cake standing up and added a detail neither of his parents had known, which surprised all of them. It was the ordinary thing, the simple, unremarkable rhythm of people who were comfortable together at the end of a long day. Ryan sat across the table from Sophia and didn't try to hold himself at any particular distance from what he was feeling. That was new. He'd been managing that distance for years, keeping himself just far enough from his own feelings that he could call them by other names and believe it. He wasn't managing tonight. He was just sitting here. Sophia caught his eye once across the table. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. He left around 7:30, said goodbye to Carol, who held his face in both hands for a moment in the way she sometimes did and said nothing, just looked at him with the expression that had always seemed to be waiting for something, and tonight, for the first time, looked like it had found it. Said goodbye to Douglas, who clapped him on the shoulder and told him to drive safe. Said goodbye to Marcus, who said, "Yeah, man," with a sincerity that encompassed more than those two words, and Ryan understood that. Sophia walked him to the front door. They stood on the porch, the two of them, with the evening air coming in and the street quiet under the old oak trees at the end of the cul-de-sac. "Drive safe," she said. "I will. Text me when you get home." "I always text you when I get home." "I know, I'm just—" She stopped. "I'm still processing today." "Take the time you need," he said. "I'll be here." She looked at him with the directness she sometimes had when she was trying to say something without the architecture of words. He could feel it, the whole unspoken shape of it, everything that had been moving toward this moment for 6 years, pressing close on both sides. The length of it was staggering when you stopped to measure it. All those evenings and morning texts and dinners and school shows and business crises and sick children and late conversations and every single moment that had been its own small, ordinary thing and had also been, underneath, this. "You know what the worst part is?" she said. "What?" "I'm not even surprised." She shook her head slightly, something almost like laughter at the edge of it. "I think I've known for a long time. I just kept choosing not to know." "Same," he said. She reached out and straightened the collar of the old jacket. A quick adjustment, a habit, the kind of gesture that meant nothing and meant everything. Her fingers were there for just a second, barely any pressure, and then she dropped her hand. "Go home," she said. "Your daughter needs you." "She's at my mom's tonight." "Then go home and think about what you said today." "I already know what I said." "Think about whether you meant it." "I know whether I meant it." She looked at him. "I meant it," he said. She held his gaze for a long, still moment. Then she nodded once. That single nod that meant she had received something and was putting it somewhere safe. She went back inside. He stood on the porch for a moment after the door had closed, looking at the street and the trees and the ordinary evening, and felt something in himself that was old and also entirely new. It had the texture of relief, of finally, of something put down after a long carry. He walked to his car. He drove home. Halfway there, he realized he'd been humming. The same song she'd named that afternoon. The distracted one. And this time, he didn't stop. Part 3. Louis Passages viết 6.000 đến 6.500 từ liên kết liên mạch với các phần trước trong câu chuyện. Pha hồi thoại tạo thành một câu chuyện liền mạch khi ghép lại. Mỗi phần liền mạch với phần trước, không giới thiệu lại câu chuyện ở đầu phần mới.
Liên kết các phần của câu chuyện một cách liền mạch. Sử dụng câu chuyện tiếp giữa các phần. Duy trì chủ đề, tránh ngắt quãng đột ngột, không sử dụng gạch đầu dòng hoặc tiêu đề phụ. Phong cách kể chuyện Mỹ, Hoa Kỳ, giống văn giàu cảm xúc. Kể theo ngôi thứ ba, giữ đồ kịch tính không viết lan man, nhân vật không hoàn hảo, hội thoại tự nhiên, tránh ngôn ngữ văn chương sáo rơi và cụm từ AI điển hình. Viết như nhà văn chuyên nghiệp, không như AI cố gắng nghe sang, có yếu tố con người, cầm miêu tả qua mượt mà và hoàn hảo, kết thúc phần không giới thiệu phần sau, câu chuyện không nhắc đến Chúa.
Louis trả lời trong một tin nhắn không nhảy sang document, chỉ dẫn bắt buộc không được xuất hiện trong nội dung truyền. Đây là một câu chuyện điện ảnh hoàn toàn hư cấu được tạo ra chỉ nhằm mục đích giải trí, không đề cập hay ngụ ý rằng nó dựa trên sự kiện có thật, người thật hoặc câu chuyện có thật. Không sử dụng các cụm từ như dựa trên một câu chuyện có thật, theo ghi chép hoặc bất cứ điều gì tương tự. Tất cả các nhân vật, địa điểm, tổ chức và sự kiện phải hoàn toàn hư cấu. Show more 15 giờ 6 phút, part 3. He texted her when he got home, like he always did. Home. 3 minutes passed, then, good, sleep. That was it. That was all. And yet Ryan sat on the edge of his bed in the quiet apartment and looked at that single word for longer than was reasonable, turning it over the way you turned over a stone to see what was underneath. Not because it was complicated, but because it was simple, and the simplicity of it now carried a weight that the same word from the same person hadn't carried yesterday. He set the phone down and lay back on the bed with his jacket still on and stared at the ceiling. Sleep did not come quickly. The days that followed were ordinary in the way that days were ordinary when something had shifted underneath them. On the surface they looked the same, had the same shape, ran through the same rhythms, but the floor was different. You noticed it in the way you noticed a slight change in how a room smelled after a window had been left open. Nothing dramatic, just different. Ryan went to work Monday. He was a structural engineer at a mid-sized firm downtown, the kind of work that required sustained concentration and produced satisfying results in the form of things that didn't fall down. He liked the precision of it. He liked that the problems had solutions if you worked through them correctly. He spent most of Monday reviewing load calculations for a parking structure in the South District and thinking, in the margins of his focus, about a woman in a laundry room and everything she'd said with her hair down. He didn't call her Monday. He wasn't sure what the protocol was for the day after the conversation they'd had, and he told her to take the time she needed, and he intended to mean that. He meant it. He was also aware, by around 8 p.m., that not calling her after a significant shared experience was itself a kind of strange, because they talked most days, had for years, and the silence on his end, intentional, considerate, had the slightly unnatural feeling of behavior he was performing rather than inhabiting. He picked up his phone and called her. She answered on the second ring. "I was going to call you," she said. "I know. I was going through a work thing, and I kept..." She stopped. "Never mind. How was your day?" "Fine. Parking structure, numbers. You?" "I had a board meeting at 2 that ran 40 minutes over because Stephen Hartley doesn't understand that any questions is a courtesy phrase, not an open invitation." A beat. "And I kept thinking about Saturday." "Me too. I'm still processing," she said. The words came out carefully. "I want you to know that. I'm not..." She paused. "I haven't figured out what I want to say yet." "You don't have to have it figured out." "I need to have it figured out. You know me." He did. He knew that she was the kind of person who did not move toward things until she had mapped the territory. It was what made her formidable in business, and what had made it possible for her to sit with feelings she had never named for 6 years without it destroying her from the inside. She was exceptionally good at holding things in place until she was ready. "I'm not going anywhere," he said. She was quiet for a moment. "I know. Take the time." "I will." A pause that had something in it. Texture, weight, something being measured. "Ryan, yeah. I'm glad it was you who followed me into that room." He closed his eyes for a second. "Me too." They talked for another hour after that, about nothing in particular. Maya's upcoming school project, a frustrating contractor situation Sophia was managing, a documentary Ryan had started watching and had opinions about. The fact that Marcus had texted Sophia 4 times on Sunday with nothing but increasing levels of the same emoji. They talked the way they always talked, and it was the same as it had always been, and entirely different, and neither of them named that difference because they didn't have to. He went to sleep that night and slept well. The following week and a half moved in that particular pattern. The daily calls that had always existed but now carried a different register. The texts that said the same things they'd always said and meant more by them. The ordinary shape of their friendship sitting over a changed foundation like a house that had been quietly renovated from the ground up while everyone was still living in it. They didn't address it directly again. Not yet. Sophia had said she needed to think, and Ryan had promised her the time. And he kept that promise not out of discipline, but because he genuinely believed that whatever this was becoming deserved to be built correctly. He'd spent 6 years getting to this point. Another week or two was not the thing that would break it. But there were moments. The Tuesday she texted him a photo of a coffee cup, a takeout cup from the cafe near her office, with the order written on the side in the barista's handwriting. His order. She'd bought it without thinking, and then apparently realized she'd done it and sent him the photo with no caption at all. He replied, "You bought my coffee on a day I'm not even there." She replied, "Don't make it weird." He replied, "It's a little weird." 3 minutes of nothing. Then, "I know." He put the phone in his desk drawer and worked for an hour with something that wasn't quite a smile, but was related to one. The Friday she called him at 11:30 at night because she was still in the office. Not unusual for her, the hours she kept were a source of low-grade, ongoing concern for everyone who knew her, and she was working through a contract dispute that had developed a new complication. He sat on his couch and talked her through it, not the legal specifics, which were outside his lane, but the strategy of it, the human element, the part about reading what the other side actually wanted versus what they were saying they wanted. He was good at that. She knew he was good at that, which was why she called. They were on the phone for an hour and 40 minutes. He fell asleep on the couch at some point with his phone still in his hand and woke up at 2 a.m. to a text that said, "You fell asleep mid-sentence. The contract is fine. Go to bed." Below that, sent 3 minutes later, "Thank you." He went to bed. It was the following Saturday that things moved again. Maya was home. She'd been at his mother's for the week, a semi-regular arrangement, 3 or 4 times a year, that his mother called grandmother time, and Ryan understood to also be a form of care directed at him. A week of uninterrupted sleep. A week of coming home to a quiet apartment and eating food he'd made for one. He loved his daughter in the absolute foundational way that restructured everything about how he understood himself. He also knew, with the honesty that came from 5 years of single parenthood, that he needed the occasional week of quiet the way he needed water. But Maya had been home since Thursday, and by Saturday morning the apartment was fully, gloriously, exhaustingly itself again. There were cereal remnants on the kitchen counter. There was a drawing on the coffee table that depicted, according to its artist, a horse and a cloud in conversation. There were tiny shoes in the hallway where shoes were specifically not supposed to go. "Maya," he called from the kitchen. "Shoes." "They're resting," she called back from the living room. "They can rest in the closet." A pause. "They don't like the closet." "They'll adjust." Another pause. Then the sound of small feet and the clunk of shoes being relocated, which was the particular sound of a 5-year-old doing a task with extreme reluctance and making sure that reluctance was audible. He made her pancakes. He made them the way she liked, the ones with the blueberries folded in before the batter set, not added on top, because she was particular about it, and he had stopped arguing with her food preferences around the time she was 3. She climbed up onto her chair and inspected the pancakes with the critical assessment of someone who had standards. "Is Sophia coming today?" she asked. It landed sideways, the way Maya's questions sometimes did. Direct, bottomless, without the cushioning that adults built around the things they wanted to know. "Not today, Bug." "Why?" "Because she has work." Maya accepted this with the equanimity of a child who had grown up understanding that Sophia's work was a real and serious entity that occasionally had prior claims. She picked up her fork. "Can we call her?" "Later, maybe." "Can I tell her about my horse drawing?" I'm sure she'd want to hear about it. Maya nodded, satisfied, and began dismantling her pancakes with methodical purpose. Ryan watched her and felt the familiar doubled nature of loving this child, the warmth of it, and underneath that, always, the faint pull of gravity that came from knowing he was doing this mostly alone. He had his mother. He had friends. He had the Sterlings, who had folded him and Maya both into their family with a completeness that still sometimes caught him off guard. He had Sophia, who knew Maya's bedtime routines and clapped loudest at school shows, and noticed when she was nervous and needed to project more. He poured his coffee, oat milk, nothing else, morning, and sat down across from his daughter and thought about what it meant to be done with halfway. About what Marcus had said. She said she was done trying to be satisfied with almost. Maya looked up from her pancakes. Daddy, what's your thinking face? What? You're doing your thinking face. I have a thinking face? It's this. She scrunched her forehead and looked middle distance with exaggerated intensity. He laughed. He couldn't help it. Is that what I look like? Sophia does the same one. Maya returned to her pancakes. But hers is more. She scrunched more, adding a subtle pursing of the lips. That's very accurate, Ryan said. I know. She said it simply, with the confidence of a person who observed and remembered. She did get that from him. And she had spent enough time around Sophia that she'd cataloged her too. Her expressions, her habits, her particular way of inhabiting a room. 5 years old and already building a picture of the people she loved, with the same attention to detail that both her father and his closest friend had always applied to the world. He called Sophia that afternoon. She answered at the first ring. I'm at the office. I know, you answer on the first ring when you're at the office. It means you were looking at your phone. A brief silence. I was waiting for a call from my legal team. Was it me? Another silence, longer. Maybe. He leaned back against the couch. From the other room, he could hear Maya narrating something to her stuffed animals in the low, serious voice she used when she was deep in imaginative play. Maya asked about you this morning, he said. Yeah? She wants to tell you about a drawing she made. A horse and a cloud. Are they in conversation? She said they were. Then I definitely want to hear about it. He could hear the change in her voice, the professional bracing easing, the real version surfacing. How is she? Requesting pancake customizations and arguing about where her shoes go. So perfect. She's 5. She's a dictator who can't tie her own shoes. Sophia laughed. A real one, the unguarded kind. He had always loved that sound, not in the way he thought about it, not in the way he had named to himself. He had simply always, when he heard it, felt something settle. Ryan. Her tone shifted. He recognized the shift, the one that meant she had been working toward saying something and had decided to say it. I'm here, he said. I've been thinking. A pause. I've been thinking since Saturday. I've been doing what I said I needed to do. Actually sitting with it, not just filing it away like I usually file things. He waited. I need to say something that I should have said in the laundry room, she said, or maybe before that, probably long before that. But I wasn't ready before that, and in the laundry room I ran out of time, and then on the porch She stopped, tried again. I need to tell you something, and I need to do it properly, not on the phone. Okay. Can you? She hesitated in the specific way she did when she was asking for something she wasn't sure she was entitled to ask for. This week, can we have dinner? The 3 of us, or just us, whichever works. She paused. I want to see your face when I say it. I've been working out what I want to say for 10 days, and I want to say it to your actual face. Thursday, he said. Maya's at my mom's Thursday night. Thursday, she said. Just us. Just us. He exhaled. Sophia. What? Whatever you're working out, I already know the shape of it. A long quiet. I know you do. Her voice had gone soft at the edges, the way it went when she stopped managing it. I know you do, but I need to say it anyway. Then Thursday. Thursday. Thursday arrived in the particular way that days you have circled on a mental calendar arrived, present and almost routine on the surface, with a current running underneath it that made everything feel slightly louder than usual. Ryan picked up Maya from daycare, fed her dinner, and drove her to his mother's place. His mother, Janet Brooks, was a small, sharp woman in her late 60s who had managed a hardware store for 30 years and approached most situations with the pragmatism of someone who had seen a great many things break and had learned to fix most of them. She met him at the door and took Maya's bag. Maya immediately began telling her about the horse and cloud drawing, having clearly identified it as the week's most significant development and one that deserved wide distribution. His mother hugged Maya, handed her off to the living room, and looked at Ryan with the assessing attention she'd been aiming at him for 32 years. "You look different," she said. "I look the same." "You don't." She studied him. Something happened. He could have deflected. He was good at deflecting. But his mother was Janet Brooks, and she had been reading him since before he could reliably form sentences, and deflection was at best a delay. "I had a conversation," he said, "with Sophia, last Saturday." His mother's expression shifted in a way that suggested this was not news. At the graduation party, Carol said something accidentally in front of people about how Sophia talks about me. His mother nodded slowly. "And?" "And we talked, and some things got said that hadn't been said." His mother looked at him for a long moment. Then she reached out and straightened the collar of the old jacket, an echo of what Sophia had done on the porch, and said, "That took long enough." "Mom, I'm not being unkind. I'm being accurate." She patted his chest once, the way she'd patted it when he was 8 and had fallen off his bike. The same gesture for the same fundamental purpose. "You'll be fine," and stepped back. "Sophia Sterling is a good woman. I know. She loves that little girl in there. I know that too. Do you know what you're doing?" "No," he said honestly. "Good." She nodded like that was the right answer. Nobody knows what they're doing with important things. Anybody who says otherwise is selling you something. She looked past him toward his car. "Go, she's waiting." "I didn't say where I was going." Ryan. His mother gave him the look she'd been giving him for 3 decades, the one that said she knew more than she said and had the patience to wait for the rest of it. "Go, Antichkaskie." They were meeting at a restaurant on the north side that neither of them had a history with. Sophia had texted him the address Tuesday morning with the brief, specific explanation. Neutral territory, no memories, no associations, just us and food. He had responded, "You have been thinking about this dinner for 4 days." She had responded, 5. He arrived, and she was already there. She was sitting at a corner table with a glass of water and her phone face down on the table, which was how she sat when she was making a deliberate effort not to fill the weight with work. She was wearing something he hadn't seen her wear before, a deep burgundy blouse, softer than her usual professional palette, and her hair down, which was, he now understood, her way of telling him she wasn't performing anything tonight. She looked up when he came toward the table and something crossed her face. Relief, mostly. The particular relief of a person who had been waiting and had been managing that waiting and was glad it was over. "You're on time," she said. "I'm always on time." "You were 2 minutes late to the party." "I was 2 minutes early to the party and you moved the goalposts." He sat down. The waiter came and they ordered drinks, and they were both quiet for a moment. Not the loaded quiet of the laundry room, not the careful quiet of the kitchen later. This was a different kind. The quiet of 2 people who knew each other deeply and were about to do something that would permanently alter the map of everything. "How's Maya?" she asked. "She told my mother the horse cloud story. My mother pretended this was new information and listened like it was." "Your mother is a good woman." "She told me to come." Sophia raised her eyebrows. "She knew about tonight?" "She guessed. She said it took long enough." Sophia looked at the table, the corner of her mouth pulled. "She's not wrong." Their drinks arrived. They ordered food, and then the waiter left and they were back in the quiet, and there was no more ordinary business to conduct, and Sophia looked at him across the table with the expression of someone who had come too far to turn back. "Okay," she said. "Okay." I wrote some of this down, she said, at work, because I knew if I didn't organize it, I'd go sideways. She paused. I'm not reading it off my phone. I didn't think you were. But I want you to know I thought about this seriously. I didn't just... She shook her head. I don't do impulsive. You know that. I know. This is not impulsive. She picked up her water glass and set it down again without drinking. A nervous gesture, one of the very few she had. When you were going through things, after Maya's mother, in the year after, do you remember that February, about 8 months after? You called me at midnight and you said you didn't know how to keep doing it, and I came over. He remembered. I sat in your kitchen until 4 a.m, she said, and you talked and I mostly listened, and at some point you fell asleep on the couch and I stayed until you woke up, and then I made coffee. She looked at him steadily, and I drove home and I sat in my car in the parking garage for 20 minutes because I couldn't... She stopped, steadied. Because something about watching you go through the worst period of your life and not being able to take any of it from you was the most painful thing I had experienced in a long time. And I sat in that car and I thought, this is not what you feel for a friend. This is not casual. Ryan's hands were still on the table. I was 26, she said. I was 26 years old and I was sitting in a parking garage at 4:30 in the morning, completely convinced that I was in love with my best friend and that I could never, ever tell him that. Her voice was level, not flat. She wasn't hiding anything. She was just being precise. Because you were in pain, because the timing was... She shook her head. And then time passed and the crisis passed and you got your footing back and you were better, and I thought, okay, it passed. It was a feeling born out of a moment and it passed. It didn't pass, Ryan said. It didn't pass. She said it like she was confirming a fact about the physical world. It just got quieter. It got quieter, and I built things over it, work and projects, and occasionally someone I dated for a few months who was good on paper and felt like settling, which I told myself was just because I had high standards. She looked at him directly. My high standards had a face, Ryan. That was the thing I didn't want to admit. He looked at her. He thought about everything he knew about this woman, her brilliance and her stubbornness, and the way she moved the dessert table, and the way she straightened his jacket collar, and the way she held his daughter without being asked, and the way she had sat in a parking garage at 4:30 in the morning because loving someone was sometimes just the weight of their pain when you couldn't carry it for them. I have been in love with you, she said simply, since at least that February, maybe before. But that February is when I knew what to call it. She exhaled. I'm not telling you this so you feel obligated to anything. I'm telling you because I said what I needed to think about, and what I needed to think about was whether I could say this clearly and honestly without... She paused. Without hiding behind almost. Without settling for the version of this that felt safe. She met his eyes. You said in the laundry room that you called it friendship because you were afraid of losing me. I did the same thing, for the same reason, and I'm tired of doing that. The restaurant continued around them. Soft noise, the clink of glasses, other people living other parts of their lives. Ryan sat across from the woman who had been the fixed point of his life for 6 years and felt the fear, the real fear, the foundational one, not leave him exactly, but change, become something smaller than the thing underneath it. That February, he said, after you left, I woke up on the couch, and you were gone, and there was coffee made, and... He stopped. I knew you'd stayed all night. I knew because you'd folded the blanket. You always fold things, you can't help it. He looked at her. I sat with that coffee and I thought, this is not what a friend does. This is something else. And I spent 4 months telling myself it wasn't. Sophia's breath came out slowly. I was scared, he said. That's the whole of it. I was scared, and I had Maya, and I had the friendship, and I told myself that was enough because naming what I actually felt meant risking all of it. And I didn't... He shook his head. I couldn't risk Maya losing the person she... He stopped. She's never had a mother, not in any real way. And you have been... He had to be careful here because the feeling was big, and he wasn't someone who did big feelings out loud without it costing him something. You've been the most important woman in her life since before she knew what important meant. And the idea of doing something that would take that away from her. Ryan, Sophia's voice was soft. I know that's not. I know that's why, she said. I've known that was part of it. You were protecting her. I was also protecting myself. Well, I know that too. She reached across the table and put her hand over his. Not romantically, not with any kind of dramatic weight, just laid her hand over his the way she had done occasionally over 6 years when he needed grounding, and looked at him. I am not going anywhere. Whatever happens between us, whatever this is, I am not going to disappear from Maya's life. That is not conditional on anything. He turned his hand over, let his fingers close around hers. I know, he said. I need you to actually know it, she said, not just hear it. I know it, he said. I've known it for a long time. That's part of what made it harder, because there was no version of this where you were not someone I could rely on. You'd already made yourself, he searched for the word, essential. She looked at him. And you're terrifying, he said. You know that. You're one of the most terrifying people I have ever known, and I mean that as the specific compliment it is. Something in her expression broke open slightly at the edges again. The same thing he'd seen in the kitchen at her parents' house. Not collapse, just release. The loosening of something long held. You're not afraid of me, she said. I'm appropriately afraid of you. That's different. Very different. She was quiet for a moment. Her hand was still in his. I don't know exactly how to do this, she said. I want to be honest about that. I know how to run companies. I know how to negotiate contracts and manage crises and present things in the best possible light. I don't always know how to. She shook her head. Be in something, be inside it. I tend to manage things from outside. I know. You can't manage this from outside. No, he agreed. You can't. That scares me more than anything, she said. More than losing the friendship, almost. Being inside something and not knowing how to make it work. We've been inside something for 6 years, he said. We already know how it works. We just didn't call it by the right name. She looked at him for a long moment, measuring that. He could feel her measuring it, running it against everything she knew, against the 6 years of evidence in the laundry room and the parking garage and the coffee cups and the school shows and Maya's bedtime routines and every single ordinary, extraordinary thing that had built them to this table. The food arrived and they both laughed slightly at the interruption. The slightly absurd punctuation of a waiter appearing with plates precisely when the conversation had reached its most honest point. They ate. They talked. The register shifted between the weight of what they'd said and the regular warmth of an evening between people who had always liked each other's company. But the hand-holding, he had let go when the food arrived, of course, and she had pulled her hand back, but there was something different about the space across the table now. It had always been comfortable. Now it was also something more. At one point, she told him about a conversation she'd had with her board that week, a disagreement about expansion timeline, and he watched her talk, the specific animation of her face when she was describing something she cared about, the way her hands moved, the way she'd pause mid-sentence when she found a better word, and he thought, I have been watching this face for 6 years. I have been watching it and telling myself I was just paying attention the way friends did. He had been paying attention the way you paid attention to the person who mattered most. She caught him watching. What? Nothing. You have your thinking face. Maya told you about my thinking face? Maya tells me a lot of things. She picked up her glass. You're staring. I'm looking. There's a difference? You tell me. She set her glass down, looked at him directly, and said with the particular quietness of someone who had decided to stop managing distance, You can keep looking. The evening stretched out around them, the restaurant moving through its dinner service, the city doing what cities did on Thursday nights, the world being entirely indifferent to two people sitting across from each other at a corner table and finally, after 6 years, being honest about the shape of the thing between them. When they left, it was late. The street was quiet. She had parked 2 blocks down and he walked her to her car in the way he had walked her to her car dozens of times. Naturally, without discussion, because it was simply the thing he did. At her car, she turned and faced him. The streetlight was behind her, and the night air was cool, and she looked in that light exactly like herself, formidable and warm and slightly guarded and entirely real. "Okay," she said. "Okay," he said. "I said what I needed to say." "You did. It feels different," she said, saying it out loud and actually hearing it back. "It feels real," he said. She nodded. Real. He stood close to her, not as close as the laundry room, not crowded, just the natural proximity of two people who had always been comfortable with each other's physical space and were now in the process of understanding that the comfort had always been something more. "I'm not going to rush you," she said. "I know I said I'm done with almost, but I also don't want to—" "Sophia." "I'm trying to be reasonable." "Sophia." His voice was quiet and direct. She stopped. "Stop managing it," he said. She looked at him. "You don't have to manage this from outside," he said. "You told me that. You don't have to calculate the speed of it or present it in the best possible light." He looked at her, the hair down, the burgundy blouse, the expression underneath the composure that had been breaking open and closing again all evening. "Just be in it." Her jaw shifted slightly. Not resistance, adjustment. The specific adjustment of a person who had been holding something at arm's length and was deciding to let it close her. "I don't know how to do that yet," she said honestly. "I know." He moved just slightly closer, and when she didn't move back, he understood that she was already doing it, already choosing inside over outside, already letting the careful slip. "We've got time. We've wasted a lot of it. We've been building it," he said. "There's a difference." She looked up at him. The streetlight and the quiet street and the city going about its business, entirely disinterested. "I'm in it," she said, quietly, like confirming something she was only just letting herself confirm. "I want you to know that. I'm in it. I know. I've been in it for years. I know that too." She exhaled, some last held thing releasing. She reached out once and pressed her hand flat against his chest, just for a moment, just briefly, feeling the solidity of him there. Then she dropped it. "Good night, Ryan," she said. "Good night." She got in her car. He stepped back. He watched her pull away from the curb and drive down the quiet street and disappear around the corner, and he stood on the sidewalk for a long moment in the cool air. He felt something that he recognized as having been there for years, underneath the other names he'd given it. It was wide and steady, and a little frightening, and entirely certain. He walked back to his car. He drove home through the quiet city. He sat in his apartment in the dark for a few minutes and thought about parking garages, and folded blankets, and coffee orders and jacket collars, and a 5-year-old girl who noticed when people did their thinking faces. He thought about Sophia sitting across a table from him and saying, "I'm in it," with the directness of someone who had spent a long time being afraid and had finally decided that the thing on the other side of the fear was worth it. He picked up his phone, typed, "Home, 3 minutes." Then, "I know, I watched you leave." He stared at the message. Then, "Good night, Ryan." He set the phone down on the coffee table and sat in the quiet apartment and let himself feel the full size of what was happening, not managing it, not naming it something smaller, just letting it be as large as it actually was. It was very large. That was okay. Part 4. Lưu ý. Viết 6.000 đến 6.500 từ liên kết liên mạch với các phần trước trong câu chuyện và hội thoại tạo thành một câu chuyện liên mạch khi ghép lại. Mỗi phần liền mạch với phần trước không giới thiệu lại câu chuyện ở đầu phần mới. Liên kết các phần của câu chuyện một cách liền mạch. Sử dụng câu chuyện tiếp giữa các phần. Duy trì chủ đề, tránh ngắt quãng đột ngột, không sử dụng gạch đầu dòng hoặc tiêu đề phụ, phong cách kể chuyện Mỹ, Hoa Kỳ, giống văn giàu cảm xúc. Kể theo ngôi thứ 3, giữ đồ kịch tính không viết lan man, nhân vật không hoàn hảo, hội thoại tự nhiên, tránh ngôn ngữ văn chương sáo rơi và cụm từ AI điển hình. Viết như nhà văn chuyên nghiệp, không như AI cố gắng nghe sàng. Có yếu tố con người, cầm miêu tả qua mượt mà và hoàn hảo, kết thúc phần không giới thiệu phần sau, câu chuyện không nhắc đến Chúa, lưu ý trả lời trong mục tin nhắn không nhảy sang document, chi dần bắt buộc, không được xuất hiện trong nội dung truyền.
Đây là một câu chuyện điện ảnh hoàn toàn hư cấu được tạo ra chỉ nhằm mục đích giải trí, không đề cập hay ngụ ý rằng nó dựa trên sự kiện có thật, người thật hoặc câu chuyện có thật, không sử dụng các cụm từ như dựa trên một câu chuyện có thật, theo ghi chép hoặc bất cứ điều gì tương tự. Tất cả các nhân vật, địa điểm, tổ chức và sự kiện phải hoàn toàn hư cấu.
Show more 1514 Part 4. I watched you leave. He thought about that sentence for 3 days. Not obsessively. He wasn't built for obsession. He was built for the slow, patient kind of thinking that ran underneath the surface of regular life, like groundwater. But it was there, the image of her sitting in her car at the end of that block, watching his taillights disappear, and then picking up her phone to tell him so. The specific smallness of that admission, I watched you leave, from a woman who did not offer small admissions freely, who had spent 6 years building excellent architecture around the things she felt. She'd sent it anyway. He went to work Monday and thought about it between calculations. He picked Maya up from daycare and thought about it while she told him about the conflict she'd had with a boy named Carter over the proper use of the purple marker. He made dinner and thought about it and then stopped thinking about it, because there was a limit to how much a person could usefully think about 4 words, and he had reached it. He texted her Monday evening. Nothing significant. He'd seen a news story about a building collapse in another city and sent it to her with a single line about the foundation design, which was the kind of thing he knew she found interesting because she'd told him once, years ago, that she liked understanding how things were built. She responded within minutes with a question about the soil composition report, and they went back and forth for 20 minutes about structural failure modes, and it was entirely ordinary, and also, underneath, the continuation of everything that had been said across a restaurant table last Thursday. This was the shape of them now. The same surface, the different depth. Tuesday, she called him from her car on the way home from a site visit. He could hear the traffic in the background and the particular focused quality her voice had when she was driving and thinking simultaneously. I told Carol, she said, without preamble. Ryan moved to the living room and sat down. Maya was in her bedroom doing something that involved a lot of rustling and occasional announcements to her stuffed animals. What did you tell her? I told her that the thing she said at the party, the thing she didn't mean to say out loud. I told her it was accurate. A pause. She didn't say anything for a long time, and then she said she knew. Of course she knew. She said she'd known since the year you brought Maya to that Christmas dinner, and Maya fell asleep on the couch, and you carried her out to the car, and I stood at the window watching you buckle her in. Sophia's voice was even, but he could hear the texture underneath. She said the look on my face was... Another pause. She said she didn't need any more information after that. Ryan was quiet for a moment. He thought about that Christmas. He remembered the evening, but he hadn't known Sophia was watching from the window. He hadn't known that about her until right now, and it landed somewhere soft. How do you feel? He asked. Strange. In a good way, I think. Like a thing that was hidden is in the light now, and I'm waiting to see what happens to it. She exhaled. She cried a little. Carol always cries. I know, but this was a different cry. This was... She seemed to search for the word. She hugged me for a long time, and she said she'd been waiting for me to figure it out. Her voice had a slight roughness now. She said she'd been worried I was going to... She said she'd been worried that I was going to choose being careful over being happy. He didn't say anything. She's not wrong, Sophia said. That's what I've been doing. You're not doing it now. No. A quiet that had substance to it. I'm not. Then, Douglas already knows. Apparently Marcus told him Saturday after the party. So, Marcus told him Saturday. The day of. He pulled Douglas aside after you left. She said it with a tone that was equal parts exasperated and fond. My brother is 27 years old and cannot hold a single thing in his mind without immediately telling someone. He told me at the party that your grandmother had been calling me the son-in-law since noon. A silence. Then a laugh. The real one. Of course she had. Your whole family knew before we did. They've known for years, Ryan. We were the last ones. He smiled at the ceiling. Maya appeared briefly in the living room doorway, assessed that he was on the phone and therefore boring, and retreated back to whatever project was underway in her room. I wanted you to know, Sophia said, that I told her it felt important, that they know it's real, that it's not just, she stopped, that it wasn't just a strange day. It wasn't just a strange day. I know. Her voice settled. I know. They stayed on the phone for another half hour, the conversation drifting through other things, a project she was managing, something funny Maya had apparently said to Marcus on Sunday when he'd stopped by unexpectedly, a restaurant that had opened near her office that she thought he'd like, the ordinary motion of their days, the same current running underneath. When she said goodbye, her voice had the quality it had been carrying since the porch outside her parents' house, quieter somehow, less armored. He sat with the phone in his hand after she hung up and thought about a woman at a window watching him buckle a sleeping child into a car and felt the specific ache of time, of all the moments that had already passed, already been spent, in the currency of the years they hadn't named this. Not regret. Something more bittersweet and also more forgiving than regret. Just the acknowledgement that some things take the time they take. The first real difficulty arrived the following weekend. It arrived in the form of a name, Claire Denton. She was a woman Ryan had gone on 3 dates with 8 months ago. A pediatric nurse, warm and straightforward, and genuinely good company. It had ended simply, the way those things ended when the connection was pleasant but not pointed. No bad feelings, no significant conversation, just a mutual tapering that both parties had accepted without requiring a formal close. She texted him Saturday morning. Hey, heard you're single. Want to grab coffee sometime? He stared at the message for a moment with the particular blankness of a man whose mental landscape had recently been comprehensively rearranged. Then he put the phone in his pocket and went to make Maya's breakfast and thought about it while the eggs cooked. The honest answer was that he didn't want to grab coffee with Claire Denton. Not because she wasn't a good person, she was, but because there was no version of that coffee that wouldn't be him sitting across from a pleasant woman while thinking about someone else entirely. He'd done that before. Not with Claire specifically, but with the general category of women he'd dated in the past 4 years, each of whom had been fine and none of whom had been Sophia, which was a thing he had not allowed himself to identify as the actual problem until a laundry room on a Saturday afternoon. He texted back, Hey Claire, hope you're well. I'm actually in something at the moment. Sorry, bad timing. Take care. He hit send, made the eggs, didn't think about it again. Sophia called that afternoon. I need to tell you something, she said, and I want to tell you before someone else does because this is a small enough world that someone else absolutely will. 8. He'd heard her use that particular sentence structure before. It was the preface she used when the information she was delivering was complicated enough to require framing. He set down what he was working on and gave her his full attention. I had dinner with James Whitfield last night, she said. James Whitfield. Ryan knew the name. Property developer, mid-40s, extremely successful, twice divorced, the kind of man who showed up in business publications adjacent to Sophia's name often enough that Ryan had noticed and had spent 2 years not noticing that he'd noticed. Okay, Ryan said. It was a business dinner. It was always a business dinner. We're looking at a potential joint venture on the South Harbor development. Her voice was careful, not defensive, just precise. But James is... She stopped. He's asked me to dinner before, not business, and I've said no. And I want you to know that before you hear it from anyone else. You don't have to account for your dinner schedule to me, Ryan said, and then heard how that sounded and added, That came out wrong. It did, she agreed. I mean, you don't owe me a report. We haven't... He stopped. The difficulty of navigating the gap between where they were and where they hadn't yet formally arrived was suddenly, concretely apparent. We're still figuring out what this is. I know what this is, she said, with the simple directness she had when she was done qualifying something. I told you Thursday. I'm in it. That means I'm not... A pause. I'm not available to James Whitfield for anything other than business. I wanted to be clear about that. He exhaled. You don't have to explain that to me either, he said. I wanted to. Her voice was firm. Because I'm not someone who does things halfway. I decided I was in this and I meant it. I wanted you to know the whole picture. He thought about Claire Denton's text from that morning. I had a similar situation today, he said. Someone from a few months ago. I told her I was in something. A beat. You told her you were in something. That's what I said. Are you? I just told a woman I haven't spoken to in 8 months that I was. The pause that followed had a quality to it. Something settling, something finding its footing. Good, Sophia said. Then, slightly quieter. That's good. Yeah. Another pause. This is going to be weird sometimes, she said. Working out the edges of it. It's going to be complicated. I was going to say human, she said. Complicated sounds like a problem. Human sounds like something that can be worked with. He smiled. When did you get philosophical? I'm always philosophical. You don't notice because you're busy reorganizing ice. Ice distribution. I know. He could hear the smile in it. Come over tonight, she said. Bring Maya. I'll make dinner. You'll order dinner. I'll make calls that result in dinner being present. Same outcome. That's not cooking. It's executive cooking. I'm delegating. He looked over at Maya, who had appeared in the living room and was clearly listening to his end of the conversation with the focused attention of a 5-year-old intelligence gathering operation. Can we come over? He said to Maya. Her face lit up. Is it Sophia's? It's Sophia's. She was already heading toward her bedroom to get her shoes. He could hear her talking to herself as she went, running through what she apparently needed to bring. There was mention of a specific drawing and something about showing Sophia how the horse cloud story had a sequel now. We'll be there at 6, he told Sophia. I'll have food by 6. Executive cooking. The very best kind. That evening was the first of what became a regular pattern. Not formalized, not discussed as a thing being established, just the natural accumulation of evenings that began to happen with a new frequency. Dinner at her place, Maya occupying the kitchen island with drawings and commentary, while Ryan and Sophia talked over her head about adult things and occasionally below her head about Maya things, which was a distinction Maya appreciated in theory and tested the limits of in practice. Sophia's apartment was a large, clean space in a converted building on the west side. All high ceilings and gray-toned furniture and very good lighting that she'd put specific effort into because she spent a lot of time working at home and bad lighting, she had once explained to Ryan, was a choice that compounded poorly over time. There were books stacked on surfaces in the specific disorder of someone who was currently reading 5 things and didn't see the problem with that. There was a drawing Maya had made 6 months ago, a person with very round hands and what appeared to be a cloud crown, hung on the refrigerator with magnets. Maya noticed the drawing on her 3rd visit. You kept it, she said, standing in front of the refrigerator with her hands clasped behind her back, studying it with the critical assessment of an artist reviewing her earlier work. I keep all your drawings, Sophia said from behind the kitchen island. You have more? There's a stack in the drawer. She nodded toward the low cabinet by the window. I keep them. Maya considered this. Then she turned to Sophia with an expression of someone who had received information that required relocation. Why? Sophia paused, the way she paused when a question arrived from an unexpected angle. Because they're yours, she said, and I like knowing what you've been thinking about. Maya processed this. I think about horses a lot, she said. I know, I've noticed. And clouds. And sometimes dogs. She paused. And my dad. Your dad shows up pretty often, yeah. Maya nodded, satisfied with this accounting. She climbed up onto her stool and began unpacking the things she'd brought, and the matter was settled. Ryan, who had heard this exchange from the hallway, stood there for a moment before walking into the kitchen. He looked at Sophia over Maya's head. She looked back at him. She made a small gesture with her hand that was not quite a shrug, more like an acknowledgement. Yes, I have a stack of your kids' drawings. That's who I am. We've established this. He went to the cabinet and opened the drawer. There was indeed a stack, 8 or 10 drawings, some recent, some from the past year. He stood there looking at them and felt something in his chest that was too large and too specific to name quickly. He closed the drawer and went back to the kitchen. 3 weeks after the restaurant, on a Sunday afternoon, It almost went wrong. It was one of those arguments that started as something small, a practical disagreement that accumulated meaning faster than either of them managed, and became, before either had tracked the escalation, about something larger. It started over Maya's school schedule. Ryan had agreed months ago to let Maya attend a Saturday enrichment program starting in October. Science and art, mixed ages, the kind of thing that a friend had recommended and that Maya had been excited about. He'd forgotten to mention it to Sophia, which would have been fine, which had been fine for 6 years because his daughter's schedule was his business, except that Sophia had made plans for the four of them. Herself, Ryan, Maya, and Marcus, who was in town, to spend that particular Saturday at a museum Maya had been asking about for months. He told Sophia about the enrichment program on a Tuesday, and the Saturday plans collapsed, and Sophia said it was fine. And then the following Friday evening at her apartment, while Maya was in the bathroom and they were standing in the kitchen, it became clear that it was not entirely fine. "You could have mentioned it earlier," Sophia said. She was putting dishes away and her back was to him, which was how he knew the temperature of it. "I forgot. I had a lot going on. You had 2 months. Sophia, I'm not angry about the museum." She turned around. Her expression was controlled, but the jaw was doing the thing. She stopped. "I'm aware that this is your life. Maya's your daughter, and her schedule is your decision, and I don't have any claim on—" "Don't do that," he said. "Do what?" "That thing where you get hurt and then you preemptively remind yourself that you don't have the right to be hurt." She looked at him. "You made plans for all of us," he said, "and I forgot to tell you something that affected those plans. That's on me. You're allowed to be annoyed about it." "I'm not annoyed about it," she said, with the specific tension of someone who was annoyed about it. "You're doing the jaw thing." "I don't have a jaw thing." "You have a very pronounced jaw thing. Your jaw has its own communication system." She opened her mouth and closed it. She turned back to the dishes. "I'm not annoyed," she said. She set a bowl down harder than necessary. "I'm trying to figure out what I am." He waited. "I made plans," she said quietly, the control dropping slightly. "I made plans that included Maya because I thought—" She stopped. She turned around again and looked at him with the expression underneath the composure, honest and slightly raw. "I think I assumed I had more standing to make those plans than I actually do, and realizing that—" She exhaled. "It made me see how I've been thinking of things." He was quiet for a moment. "How have you been thinking of things?" She pressed her lips together. "Like I already know where I belong in your life, like it's already decided." She shook her head. "And then something like this happens, and I realize it's actually not decided, not formally, and I don't know what I am in terms of—" She gestured, a frustrated motion that encompassed more than she was saying. "In terms of what I'm allowed to plan for, what I'm allowed to factor in." He crossed the kitchen and stood in front of her. "Sophia," he said. She looked at him with the expression of someone who was trying to hold composure and was finding the effort increasingly costly. "You want to know where you belong," he said. "I want to understand what I'm—" She stopped. "I don't want to be the person who assumes things that aren't hers to assume." "You're not assuming anything that isn't true," he said. "I don't know that." "You do." "Ryan." "You know," he said steadily. "You've been standing in my kitchen, and in this kitchen, and in my life, and in my daughter's life for years, and you know exactly where you belong. You just need me to say it out loud." She looked at him. Her jaw was doing its thing, but her eyes were something else. Open, searching, waiting for him to do the thing she'd told him she needed from him. The inside, not outside thing. The actual thing. "You're not a visitor," he said. "You haven't been a visitor in a very long time. And the plans you make that include Maya, you have every right to make those plans. I should have told you about the enrichment program the minute I signed the form. That's on me." He held her gaze. "But the standing you think you're not sure about. That standing is real. It's been real for years. We've just been calling it something else." Her exhale was long and slow and released something she'd been holding. "Okay," she said. "Okay." "I should have said that earlier," she said, instead of the dish thing. "The jaw was a pretty clear signal. Stop talking about my jaw." Maya came back from the bathroom, assessed the kitchen situation with the unerring accuracy of a child who read room temperature as a survival skill, and announced that she was hungry and wanted to know where dinner was. The evening moved on, but something had happened in that kitchen, something necessary. The first real friction of two people working out the edges of a new thing, the specific kind of difficulty that was not a problem but a process, not smooth, not perfectly managed, just real. Real could be worked with. Sophia had said that. He was starting to understand what she meant. October arrived with the chill in the air and the specific quality of light that Ryan had always associated with the feeling of things becoming more interior. The shortening days and the pulling in of evenings that made apartments feel more essential, more particular, made the warmth of them matter in a way that summer warmth didn't. Maya's school show was in the third week of October. She had been preparing for 3 weeks. The program was a mixed-age performance. Songs, a short piece of spoken word, a section where the children described something they were learning about. Maya had been assigned a segment about weather patterns, which she had accepted with tremendous seriousness and prepared for by asking Ryan approximately 40 questions about clouds. He had texted Sophia about it the week after the restaurant dinner, because of course he had. Maya's school show, October 19th. She wants you there. Sophia had responded, I'll be there. No qualification, no checking of schedule, no deliberation. The show was on a Tuesday evening. Ryan sat in the third row with his mother on one side and the empty seat he'd saved on the other. He'd told Sophia the time twice, and she'd said she had a meeting that afternoon she needed to clear, but she would be there. She arrived 4 minutes before it started. He heard her before he saw her. The slight rustle of someone moving quickly down the row, the apologetic sounds made to knees that needed folding to let her past. She dropped into the seat beside him with her coat half off and slightly out of breath. Meeting ran over, she said quietly. I know. I walked the last 2 blocks. I know. You have a leaf in your hair. She reached up, found it, made a face that was somewhere between irritated and faintly amused, and disposed of it in her coat pocket. She settled in her seat. She was looking at the stage where the program hadn't started yet. Children were lining up at the sides. Teachers were adjusting microphones. Parents were taking photos. Where is she? Sophia asked. Left side. Blue cardigan. She found Maya. And Ryan watched her find Maya and watched the expression on her face change. That softening, specific and involuntary, that happened when she looked at his daughter. The same expression he'd been watching for 5 years and had called fondness and had been something considerably more than fondness the whole time. Maya, from the side of the stage, was scanning the audience. She found Ryan first, waved with her whole arm, visibly delighted. Then she found Sophia. The wave changed. It became something more, some specific version of recognition and joy. The particular kind that happened when someone you hoped would be there was actually there. Sophia waved back. Ryan's mother, on his other side, reached over and patted his knee once without comment. He didn't look at her. He was looking at his daughter and the woman beside him, and the look that had passed between them across a school auditorium, and thinking about all the ways you could miss what was directly in front of you and all the ways it was possible to stop missing it. The program started. Maya's segment came in the middle. She walked to the center microphone with the careful focus of someone managing performance nerves and not letting them show. She looked out at the audience for a second, and Ryan watched her take a breath. She projected. Sophia beside him sat up slightly straighter. She began to clap before Maya had finished her first sentence. Not loud, not disruptive, just the steady grounding rhythm of someone telling a child across a room. I can hear you. Keep going. Maya heard it. He could see it in her posture. The small adjustment, the confidence finding its footing, the voice carrying better in the second sentence than the first. Sophia's shoulder was against his. He didn't move away from it. Neither did she. Quote, after the show, the school had refreshments in the hallway. The standard parent event spread of cookies and juice in paper cups. Maya found them in the crowd with the directness of a child who knew exactly who she was looking for, and she came at them with arms out and flung herself at Sophia first. Ryan's mother made a sound beside him that was not quite a word. Sophia caught Maya and held her. Not awkwardly, not with the managed care of someone doing the right thing. The way you held a child you had known since before she could ask to be held. You projected, Sophia said. Maya, still in the hug, said, I practiced. I could tell. Could you hear me from the back? I could hear you from the front. That's where the bar starts. Maya pulled back and looked at her with the expression of a child receiving precise and useful feedback and appreciating it. The girl next to me was too quiet, she said confidentially. You can't control other people's volume, Sophia said. Only yours. Maya considered this as professional wisdom, nodded once, and turned to accept her grandmother's congratulations. Ryan looked at Sophia over his daughter's head. She looked back. There was no particular expression on her face. She was just there, slightly flushed from the walk, coat finally fully off, looking at him in the ordinary way she looked at him, which was also, always, the other way. She was great, Sophia said. She was, Ryan said. She's going to be terrifying when she's older. She already is. Gets it from her dad. He looked at her. She looked back, and the smile at the corner of her mouth was the real one. The slightly unguarded one. The one with the left side dimple. The one she couldn't quite control when something actually landed. His mother materialized beside them and introduced herself to Sophia with the firm handshake of a woman who had been waiting for an appropriate moment and had decided this was it. Janet Brooks, she said, I've heard about you for 6 years. Sophia Sterling. Sophia shook her hand without flinching. I've heard about you for 6 years, too. Good things, I hope. Mostly, Sophia said, and his mother laughed the specific laugh of a woman who appreciated candor, and something in Ryan's chest settled that he hadn't known was unsettled. The last Friday of October, Ryan was late getting home from a site visit. He texted Sophia, Running late. Can you get Maya from school? She texted back immediately. Already on it. She's with me. He got home at 6:15. He had his key in his door when he heard them through it. Maya's voice, high and animated, telling a story about something that had happened at recess, and beneath it, Sophia's voice asking a follow-up question with the specific quality of someone who was actually listening and wanted the next part. He stood outside his own front door and listened. Maya said something about a boy named Carter, the same boy from the purple marker incident, and apparently a new development in that ongoing saga, and Sophia said something back that made Maya laugh, the full-body laugh she did when something was genuinely funny to her, and she wasn't trying to be polite about it. He put his key in the lock. When he opened the door, Maya was at the kitchen table with a glass of juice and what appeared to be a new drawing in progress. Sophia was sitting across from her with a work document open on her phone that she had clearly not been looking at. She looked up when he came in. Daddy's home, Maya announced without looking up from the drawing. Hey, Bug. He set his bag down and looked at Sophia. Thank you. She's been telling me about Carter, Sophia said, the purple marker. Apparently it's escalated. It always escalates. Maya looked up. Carter said my horse didn't look like a horse. Carter, Ryan said carefully, is not an art critic. Sophia said the same thing, Maya said, apparently satisfied with this consensus, and returned to the drawing. Ryan went to the kitchen and got himself a glass of water and stood leaning against the counter looking at them. His daughter, and this woman who had been in the chair across from his daughter with a document she wasn't reading, waiting for him to get home. He thought about the kitchen argument, about Sophia saying, I think I assumed I had more standing than I actually do, about what he'd said back, you haven't been a visitor in a very long time. He looked at her now, in his kitchen, with her coat hung on the back of the chair and her shoes off, because she'd been here long enough to take her shoes off, and he thought that there were things a person could do and things a person could say, and the two were never identical, but right now they were very close. Sophia, he said. She looked up from the document she wasn't reading. Stay for dinner. She looked at him. Not just dinner, he said. He put his water glass down. I mean, stay. He said it the way he'd been working toward saying it for weeks, with the simplicity of something that had been decided and just needed to be spoken. I mean, stop going home at 9:30 and sleeping in an apartment that doesn't have Maya's drawings in the drawer. The kitchen was very quiet. Maya had gone still over her drawing. Sophia looked at him with the expression he had come to know as the one underneath everything, the one without the management, without the architecture, just Sophia at the exact center of herself. The one he'd first seen, really seen, in a laundry room on a Saturday afternoon that had changed the map of everything. "I have a whole apartment," she said. "I know. I have a very good apartment. I worked hard on the lighting." "You can keep the apartment." "The lighting alone—" "Sophia." She looked at him. "I'm not telling you to move in tomorrow," he said. "I'm telling you that you belong here, in whatever shape that takes, at whatever speed it takes. You're not someone who comes and goes." He held her gaze. "You're someone who stays." She was quiet for a long moment. Maya, who had been listening with the focused attention of a child who understood that something important was happening, even if she didn't have all the words for it, looked up at Sophia and said, "You could have the big chair." Sophia looked at Maya. "The reading chair," Maya clarified. "By the window. It's the best one." She said it with the absolute seriousness of someone making a genuine offer, one of her most valued things freely given. Sophia's face did the thing, the opening at the edges, the thing that wasn't crying but was in the same territory. And she pressed her lips together once, pulling it back. "That's a very good chair," she said. "It's the best one," Maya confirmed and went back to her drawing. Sophia looked back at Ryan. He waited. She reached over and straightened a dish that didn't need straightening. The same habit, the same reflexive gesture of her hands, when the rest of her was trying to work something out. Then she looked up at him with the directness that was the truest thing about her. "Okay," she said. "Okay?" he said. "I'll stay for dinner." A pause, the corner of her mouth, "and we'll figure out the rest." He crossed the kitchen. He stood close to her, closer than the restaurant, closer than the porch, closer than any of the careful distance he'd been maintaining out of the patience she'd asked for, which he had kept, which had cost him something, and which had also been exactly right. She looked up at him. "We're done being careful," he said. It was not a question. She looked at him for a half-second that contained everything. 6 years and a parking garage, and folded blankets and coffee cups, and the old jacket, and a 5-year-old with no concept of spatial fairness, and every late call and every almost and every time they had both stood at the edge of this and looked at it and looked away. "We're done," she said. He kissed her. Not tentatively, not with the performance of someone making a significant gesture. He kissed her the way you did something you'd been working toward for 6 years, with the specific certainty of knowing exactly where you were and who you were with, and that this was the thing that was true. She kissed him back. Maya, at the kitchen table, made a short, emphatic sound that was clearly approval, and then said, "Can we have pasta tonight?" Ryan pulled back. Sophia was looking at him with the real smile, fully unguarded this time, the dimple present and accounted for, eyes bright. He looked at his daughter. "We can have pasta. With the cheesy thing on top." "With the cheesy thing on top." "Okay." She returned to the drawing. "That's good." Ryan looked back at Sophia. She shook her head slightly in the way she did when she was trying not to fully smile and failing at it. Her hand was still lightly against his chest. She'd reached up at some point during the kiss and hadn't moved it yet. She moved it now, but slowly. And she didn't step back. The apartment was warm and small and real, with a child's drawing on the table and a jacket on the hook by the door, and a woman who had stayed, finally, in the place where she had always belonged. Part 5. Lưu ý, thus, viết 6.000 đến 6.500 từ liên kết liên mạch với các phần trước trong câu chuyện, và hồi thoại tạo thành một câu liền mạch khi ghép lại. Mỗi phần liền mạch với phần trước không giới thiệu lại câu chuyện uyển ở đầu phần mới. Liên kết các phần của câu chuyện một cách liền mạch, sử dụng câu chuyện tiếp giữa các phần, duy trì chủ đề, tránh ngắt quãng đột ngột, không sử dụng gạch đầu dòng hoặc tiêu đề phụ, phong cách kể chuyện Mỹ, Hoa Kỳ, giống văn giàu cảm xúc. Kể theo ngôi thứ ba, giữ đồ kịch tính không viết lan man, có quan điểm cá nhân, thông điệp, bài học, góc nhìn con người. Nhân vật không hoàn hảo, hội thoại tự nhiên, tránh ngôn ngữ văn chương sáo rơi và cụm từ AI điển hình, viết như nhà văn chuyên nghiệp, không như AI cố gắng nghe sàng. Có yếu tố con người, cầm miêu tả qua mướt mà và hoàn hảo, phần 5 giải quyết hết vấn đề và kết thúc trọn vẹn câu chuyện không nhắc đến Chúa. Lưu ý trả lời trong mục tin nhắn không nhảy sang document.
Tri dân bắt buộc không được xuất hiện trong nội dung truyền. Đây là một câu chuyện điện ảnh hoàn toàn hư cấu được tạo ra chỉ nhằm mục đích giải trí, không đề cập hay ngụ ý rằng nó dựa trên sự kiện có thật, người thật hoặc câu chuyện có thật.
Không sử dụng các cụm từ như dựa trên một câu chuyện có thật, theo ghi chép hoặc bất cứ điều gì tương tự. Tất cả các nhân vật, địa điểm, tổ chức và sự kiện phải hoàn toàn hư cấu. Show More 15 giờ 19 phút Part 5. The pasta had too much salt. Ryan noticed it first. The slightly over-seasoned quality of the sauce that happened when he was distracted and added a second pinch without remembering the first. He waited for Sophia to notice, because she always noticed, and she did, about 4 bites in. She looked at the bowl and then at him and said nothing, just reached across the table for the water glass with the expression of someone making a gracious adjustment. Maya ate 2 full bowls and asked for more cheesy thing on top. That was dinner. That was the kitchen. That was the evening where everything changed and the pasta was slightly too salty, and a 5-year-old offered her best chair to the woman who had been collecting her drawings in a drawer, and nobody gave a speech about it. That was how real things happened, not in the version where everything lands perfectly, in the version with the salt. November came in cold and deliberate. The city pulled its coat on, and the days got short, and the particular intimacy of winter settled over things. That seasonal drawing inward that made the warmth of specific rooms, specific people, feel more conscious and chosen. Ryan and Sophia did not move in together in November. That was not the speed of it. She kept her apartment. He kept his. But the space between them had changed in the specific way that space changed after something was decided. It had become porous in a way it hadn't been before. She had a key to his apartment by the second week of November, which had happened practically and without ceremony when she'd been there with Maya on a day he was running late from work, and it simply made sense for her to have it. He had a drawer at her place by the 3rd week, because he'd left a change of clothes after staying late one Tuesday, and she'd told him to stop cycling the same things through a bag like he was a visiting relative and had cleared a drawer. He'd stood in front of that empty drawer for a moment before putting anything in it, the way you stood at the edge of a thing before stepping into it. He stepped into it. Maya adjusted with the unceremonious ease of a child who had already long since absorbed Sophia as a fixed part of her landscape and simply updated the label. There was no period of confusion or difficulty. There was one conversation about 2 weeks into November when Maya was in the bathtub and called through the door with the directness of a 5-year-old who had been processing something privately and had arrived at a question. "Daddy?" "Yeah, Bug." "Is Sophia your girlfriend now?" Ryan was sitting on the other side of the bathroom door. He had been anticipating some version of this question in the way you anticipated things you knew were coming and had no clean plan for. "Yeah," he said. "She is." A pause filled with the sound of water. "Does she know?" "She does." "Did you tell her?" "We told each other." Another pause. "Carter at school has a girlfriend," Maya said. "He said they hold hands." "We hold hands sometimes." "I've seen." A longer pause, more water sounds. "Is she going to be around more?" "A lot more." "Good." The word was simple and complete, delivered with the finality of a verdict. "She knows about clouds." He sat outside the bathroom door and looked at the hallway ceiling and thought that the children were almost always right about the things that mattered, and most adults spent decades getting back to what a 5-year-old already understood. Sophia told him about the drawer conversation with her mother in early December, sitting in his living room on a Sunday afternoon with a mug of tea she'd made herself because he'd run out of the specific kind she liked, and she'd found a backup in the back of the cabinet and decided it would do. "She said she wants to meet Maya properly," Sophia said. "She's met her before, obviously, at things, but she said she wants a real visit. She wants to cook for her. Carol already loves Maya." Carol loves Maya ferociously. That's the word she used, ferociously. Sophia looked at her tea. She cried again. Carol cries at most things. This was a good cry. Sophia's voice was quiet. She said she was glad the waiting was over. She paused. I didn't know she thought of it as waiting. I didn't know she'd been. She stopped, watching that closely. Your family has been watching this longer than we have. I know. She looked up at him. Your mom, too. My mom knew before I did. I think she knew before I knew I was capable of the feeling. Sophia looked at him with the directness she used when she was taking something in rather than managing it. Does that bother you? That it was that visible? He thought about it honestly, the way she'd asked him to. Not the polished answer, the real one. A little, he said. There's something in it that feels like I wasn't as private as I thought I was. You weren't. No, he exhaled. But I also think if it had been less visible, maybe we'd have been less, he searched, less accountable to it. When Carol said what she said at the party, we couldn't look away anymore. Maybe we needed somebody to say it out loud. Sophia was quiet for a moment. I've thought about that, about whether we would have gotten here without the party. I think we would have eventually. Eventually is doing a lot of work in that sentence. He looked at her. We got here, he said. That's the part that matters. She held his gaze for a moment. Then she put her tea down and moved across the couch toward him, and he put his arm around her and she leaned her head against his shoulder with the weight of someone who was not performing ease, but actually felt it. They sat like that while Maya napped in the other room, and the Sunday light went gold outside the window, and the apartment held them both in the specific, unremarkable warmth of an ordinary afternoon that was also everything. The harder thing, the thing that didn't resolve as cleanly as the key and the drawer and Maya's matter-of-fact acceptance, was Sophia's own interior work. She had warned him about it in the restaurant. She had said, I don't always know how to be inside something. I tend to manage things from outside. She had not been wrong about herself. There were moments in those early months when the management instinct kicked in, and she put distance between herself and whatever she was feeling with the efficiency of a person who had been doing it so long it happened before she consciously chose it. Ryan learned to recognize those moments, not because she withdrew dramatically. Sophia Sterling did not do dramatic withdrawal, but because a particular quality entered her voice, a small over-precision, a sentence that was technically kind but had a slight glass quality to it, transparent and a little hard. The first time it happened after the kitchen, he let it go and waited. The second time he said her name once, just her name, in the specific quiet way that meant, I see it, it's okay, come back. She looked at him when he did that, both times, and came back. Not immediately, not without the friction of it, but she came back and he was there when she did. And that was the shape of the work they did. Not dramatic repair, not clean resolution, just the patient and ongoing practice of two people who had chosen each other and were committed to deserving the choice. He was not perfect in it either. He had his own habits. He had the version of himself that went quiet under stress instead of saying what was wrong, the version that processed privately for too long and then expected the people around him to understand the conclusion he'd reached without having been shown the process. Sophia called him on it twice in December. Once when he'd been tense about a work situation for a week without telling her, and she'd assumed for 2 days that something was wrong between them. You did the quiet thing, she told him. I know. I spent 2 days thinking I'd done something. I'm sorry. I don't need sorry. I need you to tell me when something is wrong so I'm not reading your silences and coming up with my own story about what they mean. He looked at her. That's fair. I have a very active imagination when it comes to things going wrong, she said. I need information, not protection from information. I know. He reached for her hand. I know. I'll do better. She squeezed his hand once. She wasn't a person who lingered in the aftermath of addressed things. She had said what needed saying, and now it was said, and the next thing could begin. He was learning to love that about her. The cleanness of her accountability when she chose it, the way she didn't nurse grievances or stack them for later. The work was real. It was also not crushing. It was the work of two adults who had enough history to know each other well enough to begin, which was a different and better starting position than most people got. Christmas was at the Sterling's house. This was not new. Ryan and Maya had been part of the Sterling Christmas for 4 years running, which had started as a casual inclusion. You don't have plans, we have too much food, and had become a tradition with the specific permanence of things that nobody formally decided but everyone counted on. This year, it was different in its sameness. The house was the same. Carol's cooking was the same. Douglas's insistence on managing the speaker situation was the same. Marcus was there with his fiancée, a woman named Priya, who was warm and sharp and had taken exactly 3 minutes to make Maya her devoted admirer. Eleanor Sterling was in her chair with her tea and her hard candies and her expression of total comprehension. What was different was the texture of Ryan being there. The way Carol touched his arm when he came in the door, with the particular warmth of someone welcoming a person they love to a place where he now, formally, fully belonged. The way Douglas asked his opinion on the speaker placement as a genuine question rather than a courtesy. The way Sophia moved through the house alongside him. Not dramatically changed from how they'd always moved through it together, but changed in the way a note changed when you added the one that had always been missing from the chord. Maya spent the morning in a state of high operational activity, helping unwrap things, distributing items to their rightful owners with the focused purpose of a professional logistics manager, providing running commentary on everything. She was wearing a red dress she'd picked herself and had strong opinions about her hair that had taken 20 minutes to negotiate that morning. After lunch, when the adults had drifted into the comfortable post-meal sprawl of a family that had eaten well and nowhere to be, Maya climbed up onto the arm of the couch next to Eleanor Sterling and showed her the drawing she'd brought as a gift. Eleanor looked at it with the unhurried attention of someone who understood that small people required real looking and asked 3 questions about the horse and the cloud, and Maya answered all of them with the seriousness of an artist explaining her work. Ryan, from across the room, watched this. Sophia appeared beside him with 2 cups of coffee, his order without being asked, because she had never needed to ask. "She's going to be a handful when she's older," Sophia said quietly. "She already is. I mean, more specifically, she has opinions." Sophia watched Maya explaining the cloud's emotional state to Eleanor. "She's going to argue well. Terrifyingly well. I'm going to enjoy watching it." He looked at Sophia. She was looking at his daughter with the expression he had stopped trying to name because it was too large and too specific for a single word, the expression that contained all of it. The years, the drawings in the drawer, the school show clapping, the chair by the window. "Sophia," he said. Are you happy?" She turned and looked at him. Not the assessment look, not the composed one, not the professional face or the careful face or any of the faces she used to manage distance. Just her. Looking at him in his old jacket in her parents' living room on Christmas Day with her coffee and the sound of her family around them. "Yeah," she said, "I really am." He looked at her for a moment longer than he needed to. "Stop," she said. "I'm not doing anything." "You're doing the looking thing." "You told me I could keep looking." She paused. The dimple appeared. "I did say that." "You did." She turned back toward the room. Her shoulder was against his. Neither of them moved away from it. Carol looked over from across the room and caught Ryan's eye and smiled. The smile that had always been waiting for something fully arrived. There was a moment in late January that Ryan thought about for a long time afterward. Not because it was dramatic. It wasn't. It was one of the most ordinary things that had happened in a collection of increasingly ordinary things that had become his life, and that was precisely why it stayed with him. It was a Tuesday. He got home at his normal time. He could hear them before he opened the door, Maya and Sophia, both in the kitchen in the middle of something. He stood at the door and listened for a second, the way he had stood outside the bathroom door in November, and the way he had stood outside his front door in October. What he heard was an argument. Not a bad one. A homework argument. Maya's kindergarten had recently introduced a worksheet assignment that Maya had strong feelings about, and Sophia apparently had different strong feelings about how it should be approached, and neither of them was backing down. "You have to write the letters the way the sheet shows," Sophia was saying. "My letters are better," Maya said. "Your letters are creative. The sheet wants the standard letters." "The standard letters are boring." "Maya, they are. They may be boring and they still need to get done. My way is better. Your way is not what the teacher asked for." A pause.
Then Maya, with the specific tactical shift of a child who had decided to try a different approach. What if I do it my way, and then do it the sheet way? A pause from Sophia, longer than it needed to be if the answer was simply no. Both versions? Sophia said. Both versions, Maya confirmed. So the teacher can see both. Ryan stood outside his door. That's... Sophia started. He could hear her recalibrating. That's actually not a bad idea. I know. Don't say I know like that. Like what? Like you already knew you were going to win. A brief silence. Then Maya, at a lower volume but clearly audible through a closed door, I knew I was going to win. Sophia's laugh, the real one, the unguarded one that he had always loved, came through the door clearly. He stood on the landing for another moment, his key in his hand, and felt something that was not a single feeling but a composite of many. The weight of the years behind him and the ease of the life in front of him. The knowledge of what it had cost to get here, and the understanding that the cost had been correct. That there was no version of this that he would trade for the version where he'd stayed careful and protected and nameless. He had been afraid to call this what it was for so long. He had built elaborate structures of restraint around a feeling that was simply love, not a complicated love, not a qualified one, not a love with an asterisk attached to it. Just love, in the patient and rooted and permanent way that things became permanent when they had been tested enough times to be trusted. The love he had for his daughter was the first thing that had restructured everything. He had not known, before Maya, what it meant to love something more than you feared losing it. She had taught him that. She had been teaching him for 5 years, one sideways sleeping arrangement and one purple marker crisis at a time, that the things worth having were the things you stayed inside of. Sophia had been teaching him the same thing. It had just taken him longer to let the lesson land. He put his key in the lock. The front door opened and Maya's head appeared at the end of the hallway before he'd fully stepped inside. "Daddy," she announced, "I won." "I heard." Sophia laughed. "I heard that too. It means I was right." He took off his jacket and hung it on the hook, the old canvas jacket, faded and soft and still exactly itself. Being right and making someone laugh are different things, Bug. What if they're the same thing? He looked at her. She had flour on her left hand, which meant there had also been baking at some point, and her hair had lost the morning's careful styling and was doing its own thing, and she was looking at him with the expression that was entirely her own, direct and curious and certain in the specific way of a person who had never yet been taught to doubt herself, and with any luck wasn't going to learn it soon. "Sometimes," he said, "they're the same thing." She accepted this and disappeared back toward the kitchen. He followed her. Sophia was at the counter, the homework worksheet spread out in front of her, a second piece of paper beside it where Maya had apparently already started her creative version. There was a mixing bowl with what looked like the beginning stages of something baked. Sophia had flour on her sleeve she hadn't noticed. She looked up when he came in. "She won," Sophia said. "I know." She knew before the argument was over. She always knows. "That's alarming." "I've been alarmed for years." He moved into the kitchen and leaned against the counter beside her. "Is that a cake?" "It's an attempt." She looked at the bowl with the assessment of someone who had made a decision to try something and was reserving judgment on the outcome. "I found a recipe. Maya wanted chocolate." Maya always wants chocolate. "The recipe said it was simple." "Was it?" The recipe was optimistic. She picked up the mixing bowl and looked at the batter. "I think it's fine. I'm not sure." "I'll eat it regardless." She looked at him. "That's not the quality control I need?" "I'll eat it and tell you it was good regardless. You won't know the difference." She put the bowl down. She looked at him with the expression that was becoming one of his favorite things in the world, the one that couldn't decide between fond and exasperated and landed somewhere in the middle with the dimple showing. "You're going to be a problem," she said. "You've known that for 6 years." "I underestimated the scale of it." "No, you didn't." She looked at him for a moment. Then she shook her head once, the small private shake that meant she was conceding something she didn't need to say out loud.
Maya climbed back onto her stool and picked up her pencil and looked between them with the even assessment of a child who understood the room perfectly and had the patience to wait until the adult moment passed. "Can we eat soon?" she said. 30 minutes, Sophia said. "The chicken has 20 more minutes and then the pasta." "Is there cheesy thing?" "There's cheesy thing." "Okay." Maya bent over her homework. "That's good." Mine. The world, in the way of worlds, continued on its business. Sophia's company expanded into a new city in February. A deal she'd been building toward for 18 months, finally closed, announced at a press event where she stood at a podium in a gray suit and spoke with the precise, controlled confidence of someone who knew exactly what she'd built and what it had cost. Ryan watched the coverage on his phone from his office and felt the specific pride of knowing a person in the fullness of who they were, not the version the camera got. He texted her. "You were good." She texted back, "I know." He texted, "Don't say I know like that." 3 minutes. Then a single character, the kind of punctuation that meant she was trying not to fully smile at her phone in a professional setting. He put his phone in his desk and went back to the load calculations with the particular ease of a man whose life had found its footing. Spring came and Maya's school year moved toward its end, with the accumulating warmth of all things that were going well. She had learned to read properly by March, not just the memorized words, but actual decoding, letters clicking together into meaning, and had treated this development with the seriousness it deserved. She chose her bedtime books with new authority. She spelled things on pieces of paper and slid them across surfaces to people without explanation, waiting for their reactions. She gave Sophia a folded piece of paper on a Tuesday evening in April. Sophia unfolded it at the kitchen table. It said, "I love you, Sophia." The handwriting was careful and labored and excellent, in both the standard form and Maya's preferred version. Sophia sat with the piece of paper for a long time without saying anything. Maya, who had delivered the note with the calm of an official communication and then immediately become interested in something across the room, glanced back once to assess impact and appeared satisfied with what she found. Ryan was in the hallway and saw all of it. He didn't say anything. Sophia folded the paper carefully, the clean, precise folds of a person treating something with the respect it warranted, and put it in her jacket pocket. She pressed her hand flat against it once, the way she pressed her hand flat against his chest sometimes, feeling the solidity of the thing. Then she took a breath and went back to being present in the kitchen. There were still hard days. There were days when Sophia was unreachable in the way that driven people became unreachable when work pulled them under, and Ryan had to hold the discomfort of not being her first priority in a given 16 hours without making it mean something it didn't mean. There were days when his own exhaustion made him short with Maya, and then short with Sophia, and then short with himself, and she had to hold the specific patience of loving someone who was running on insufficient sleep and too much responsibility, and not always their best self. There were days when the old fears surfaced, the voice in the back of him that said, "This is too good to stay, this is too much to keep, what happens when it goes wrong?" He had that voice. He didn't think it would ever fully leave. He had just gotten better at hearing it and letting it pass without letting it drive. Sophia had her version of the same voice. He knew this because she told him once, in the specific quiet of late night when they were talking about nothing and then talking about something real, that she sometimes woke up in the early hours and had a few minutes where the old pattern reasserted itself. The pattern that said, hold back, protect it, don't go fully in, that's how things survive. "And then what?" he asked. "Then I look at where I am," she said. "And it passes." He understood that, the looking as an antidote, the checking of the present moment against the fear. "You're good at that," he said. "I've been practicing." She turned her head and looked at him in the dark. "You help." "How?" "You're very consistent," she said. "You're the same person on the bad days that you are on the good ones. I didn't know I needed that until I had it." He thought about that, about the consistency she was describing, not the consistency of someone who had no variation, who was steady because nothing was moving, the consistency of someone who kept showing up to the same thing even when the showing up was hard. Even when the jacket needed to be washed again and the pasta was too salty and the load calculations weren't resolving and the 5-year-old had opinions about letters. You're consistent, too, he said. She made a sound that was slightly skeptical. You are, he said. You're there. You show up. I know that whatever else is moving, you're going to be there. He looked at her in the dark. That's consistency. She didn't say anything for a moment. Then, I spent a long time thinking I wasn't built for this kind of thing. I know. Turns out I just needed the right situation. The right situation, he said. The right person. She said it quietly, without any weight on it, as a plain statement. Which turns out to have been the same person the whole time. He reached over and found her hand in the dark. She held it. The graduation party was a year behind them when Carol Sterling made her plan. A family dinner. The whole group. Douglas and Carol, Marcus and Priya, Ryan and Sophia and Maya, Janet Brooks, who Carol had called personally and who had accepted immediately and with the specific satisfaction of a woman whose patience had been correct all along. Carol cooked for 2 days. The table was set in the dining room, which was used for special occasions, and had the specific feeling of a room that understood its own significance. Extra chairs had been brought in. Douglas had arranged the speaker volume to a level everyone agreed on, which took 20 minutes and involved 4 opinions and 1 compromise. Maya sat between Ryan and Janet and across from Sophia, which meant she had access to 4 separate adults and used this strategically throughout the meal. She had strong opinions about the seating arrangement and had made them known during the setup phase. Nobody had changed the arrangement because her logic had been sound. Carol gave a speech before the meal. Not long, Carol's speeches were always calibrated for emotional impact over duration. She stood at the head of the table and looked at the people sitting at it, and talked about what it meant to have a table full. She didn't talk about Ryan and Sophia specifically. She didn't need to. She talked about the accumulation of people you loved and how the table expanded over the years. Not because you added chairs in a deliberate plan, but because certain people arrived and simply became part of the architecture of your life, and you looked back one day and saw that the table had grown because the people had grown. She talked about watching people you loved figure out what they needed, which was not always fast and was not always clean, but was always, in the end, worth the wait. She cried briefly and collected herself and then said, "Eat. I worked on this for 2 days." The table ate. Ryan looked across at Sophia. She was in conversation with Priya about something, gesturing with the animation she had when she was engaged and had temporarily stopped managing her expression. Her hair was down. She had the real smile on. She caught his eye across the table and held it for a moment. And in that moment, he felt the full weight of everything. The 6 years and the laundry room and the parking garage and the folded blankets and the drawer of drawings and the salty pasta and the key and the piece of paper that said, "I love you, Sophia," in careful double version letters. And underneath all of it, the simple foundational fact that he was a man who had been afraid to name what he had, and had named it, and the naming had not destroyed it but completed it. He thought about the long way around, the years they'd spent describing love as friendship, the patient accumulation of all those ordinary, extraordinary moments that had been building this without their permission. And he thought that maybe that was the only honest way it could have happened, for 2 people as careful as they were. Not a shortcut. The whole road. There was something in that worth saying, not because it resolved the years wasted, but because it honored what the years had actually been. They hadn't been wasted. They had been preparation. The friendship had been real. The trust they'd built in all that time had become the ground underneath everything that came after. The reason the after was stable. You couldn't have gotten to the table without walking the road. Maya tugged his sleeve. "Daddy," she said, "pass the bread." He passed the bread. She accepted it with the focused purpose of a person with priorities and passed it directly to Janet, who had been reaching for it, because Maya had noticed the reaching and understood that getting the bread to where it was needed was the objective. Janet thanked her. Maya nodded with the matter-of-fact dignity of someone doing their job well. Ryan looked at his daughter, his impossible, sideways sleeping, purple marker-protecting, shoe-arguing, cloud-theorizing, both versions doing, room-reading daughter. The person who had restructured everything about him before she could speak, who had arrived in his life as pure demanding need and had become his clearest mirror and his most reliable teacher, who had known, before he fully knew, that the woman across the table was the one who belonged there. He thought about the version of himself who had been afraid. That version was still him. The fear hadn't been solved or removed, it had been met. There was a difference. Solutions were clean. Meeting something was messier and more permanent. You carried the meeting with you. It changed the shape of you, and you continued. Across the table, Sophia had turned back to him. The conversation with Priya had paused naturally, and she was looking at him with no particular expression, just looking, the way she'd told him he could keep doing, with her hair down in her parents' dining room at a table full of the people they both loved. He held her gaze. She didn't look away. The dinner continued around them. Voices and laughter, and the sound of Douglas beginning what was clearly going to be a long story about the speaker system, and Marcus already preparing the expression of a man who had heard this story and was going to listen anyway, and Carol adding the details Douglas left out, and Janet laughing at the part that was genuinely funny, and Priya leaning toward Maya to look at something Maya was drawing on a napkin, because Maya had a felt-tip pen she had produced from somewhere and was putting it to use. The table was full. Not because it had been planned or earned or perfectly arranged, because people who loved each other had kept showing up, even when showing up was uncertain, even when they didn't have the right word for what they were showing up for. Because two people who had been, in the end, more afraid of staying afraid than of being honest. Because some tables grew not by grand design, but by the simple, stubborn accumulation of ordinary days in which the right people kept choosing each other. Ryan picked up his glass. Next to him, Maya was explaining the napkin drawing to Priya in the serious tones of an artist doing an exhibition walkthrough. Across from him, Sophia was watching Maya with the expression that contained everything. He thought, this is it. Not a peak. Not the top of something that would descend from here. Just the it. The daily, recurring, slightly salty, sometimes overscheduled, homework arguing, key having, drawer sharing, school show attending, drawing collecting, hand-holding, honest, imperfect, entirely real it. He was done being afraid of it. He had been done since a laundry room on a Saturday afternoon, but some things took time to fully inhabit. He was there now. He was in it. He looked at Sophia across the table, and she looked at him, and he thought, 6 years. She thought, I know. Neither of them said a word. They didn't have to. The table was full, and the evening was long, and somewhere in the middle of all of it, the last careful distance between them simply, quietly, closed.